Um,
Hey,
hey, what's going
what's
on,
up?
everybody?
How you doing?
Hello.
Well, today we've changed things up a little bit. You know, Kevin Monahan, our other guest, he wasn't really cutting the mustard, so we got rid of that guy. No, just kidding,
Those
just kidding.
Georgia Bulldog fans,
We
just
we
kidding.
uh we actually planned this from the beginning, and we had Kevin as our wonderful host on the first day, and added the lovely Amy Fenton for day two. So, Amy, hey, Amy, real quick, why don't you
Yay.
introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. I'm Amy Fenton, as he said. I I work for Orange. I am an Orange specialist. I work with our large multi-site churches around the country, and I love it. And I also get to produce Orange VBS, which is super fun. And, in my spare time, I'm friends with these guys.
That
Which is
is that
it's
is
basically a
that is true.
ministry. It's a ministry on the side, essentially, is what that is. Yeah,
No,
it's
and
fun.
and
Almost full
Amy,
time.
Amy's being very humble here too, because Amy is actually the one who brought VBS to Orange.
True.
She's the brainchild of all things. So if you've used Orange VBS, which I feel like probably half the world has, that's you've gotten to benefit from Amy's brilliance and her work. And like she said, she's a good friend of Ministry Boost. She's a good friend of ours, and so we wanted to have her today help us host this crazy event, and we're so excited about all that we have going on. Hey, Nick, you want to give us a little bit of an update of who are some of the people we get to talk to today?
We're going to hear from Steve John, who's part of Youth Pastor Conference. If you're a youth pastor, you've probably heard of that. It really got big during the pandemic. It's an online thing just like this, but they've actually started to have like an in-person element as well, and they sell resources and do things like that. We've got Crystal Chang, a good friend, co-worker of Amy, coming on.
Yes.
That's going to be a lot of fun. Josh Griffin and Doug Fields here in the
No
early
way.
part of
Who
the
let those
afternoon.
guys? Who let those guys in?
Yeah, that's right. Well, you worked with them, so we might have to
I
ask
did.
them, tell us the secret about Kenny. What's the most embarrassing story of Kenny when he was at Mariners? We'll see. We'll see.
Get some dirt.
Yeah,
Some dirt.
That's right.
Yes.
And then we'll wrap it up with Robert Purvey, our friend who just now started working but for 10 by 10, which again, some people may have heard of but may not. So we'll certainly talk about that
Yeah.
when we get to
for
that
sure.
point. And we got a great interview with Brittany Nelson too about her new book.
Now, I know we're gonna dive in here in just a minute, and we didn't have a lot of time to talk about this yesterday. We just had so much happening, but we've got a lot of amazing breakouts. Like we've had some great in-person interviews and talks yesterday and today, but we've got almost 30 separate breakouts, all geared around the idea of recruiting, retaining, caring for, casting vision for volunteers. Nick, you got the ability to kind of show people it's not rocket science. If you're probably watching this on our main page or conference page, in the top right hand corner, you see a little menu bar and you'll see breakouts. You can click on that button and it'll take you right to a breakouts. Now, if you're not logged in, because it is on our Ministry Boost platform, you may have to log in, and all you just click on that button, and if you don't remember your password, just click on forgot password, put in your email address, it'll send it to you. It's really easy, but there's so much more content there. So when you're done with today, maybe tomorrow, a lot of you may have a day off tomorrow, maybe take some time to you know go through our breakouts. We've got so many good ones. Nick is kind of highlighting some of those, how you get there, and you can watch the videos. Sometimes they have some worksheets that go with it. You can download those. So all kinds of great resources there. We hope that it just continues to be a blessing to you and your ministry and gives you ideas. So cool. What else, Nick?
Well, our first guest isn't in here yet. So I'm thinking we're just going to shoot the breeze a little bit here with Amy while we make sure that he's all set, which means that's what I have to do. I don't know if anybody, I don't think we said this out loud, but we have a really terrible producer helping run this. It's me. So when things like this happen, I got to like focus on that. And you guys talk. You guys
Yeah.
should talk. In fact, Amy,
Uh,
you're actually wrapping up VBS for next year. Like it's almost done, right? Y'all
yes.
have really gotten ahead on
Yes.
that thing.
So let's actually gear this, because this event is all about volunteers, and you kind of represent a big part of the Orange strategy around VBS. So talk to us a little bit about some of the maybe the best strategies or tactics around having a fully like thriving VBS team. Like what do people need to be doing, thinking through to build that team that's just crazy
Sure.
awesome?
I find that people love to volunteer for VBS. That seems to be an easy on ramp for volunteers. People just, it's 1 week. They think, oh, it's no big deal. People who've never served in your ministry will volunteer for VBS. Our goal is for you to make it super fun, super engaging, for them to fall in love with a small group of kids. So then you can say, "Oh, how would you like to keep serving with them? Wouldn't that be great?" So I look at VBS more as an on ramp to get
Mhm.
kids in there, and I mean to get volunteers in there and get them really plugged in with those kids and serving with them. And I think it's a great way to grow your volunteer base, truthfully, because I feel like with VBS, just ask. And people are
Yeah.
kind of waiting to be a part of that big week. But from there, to make the bigger ask of them to say, hey, would you like to serve? How about the rest of the summer? Or how about just test it out for the fall? It can be a great way to build your volunteer teams.
Yeah, I think you're the one who inspired me. I hadn't done VBS in probably a decade or more. And then the season I was at Mariners, we did VBS huge, like 2,000
Yep.
kids. And I think you're the one who inspired me on this, of where in the past, I think when we did registration, we asked kids like what school they went to group them that
Hmm.
way. And then we had this idea, and I think you were the one who influenced it, of like, let's actually group kids by what service they attend. So that way we get kids to get to know each other. But then also at the end of the week of VBS, all those volunteers who only serve at VBS would say, hey, how great was it to get to know these kids this week? Would you be interested in being their leader all year
Right.
long? And it was so easy for people to say yes to that because they knew what they're getting into. So I agree with you. I think VBS is a great ministry on its own, but it also is a great on ramp to the week to week consistent ministry that's so important that we lead all year long.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I saw somebody in the chat said they got 26 new leaders from VBS this year. I mean, it really works if you have your VBS organized well and make that a good reflection of your ministry and what it can look like if they serve.
Yeah, that isn't that what Reggie Joiner was famous for saying this in a book he wrote 20 years ago. Think steps, not programs. And
Hmm.
sometimes we see VBS as just a program, not of the step that it could lead to. And it could lead towards kids getting better connected in ongoing groups. It could be a step towards temporary volunteers becoming permanent volunteers. So if we have that mindset of using VBS as a catalyst for what's next, then it's so much even more powerful.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Well, we're ready for Steve. So, Amy, we're going to say
Yes.
goodbye for just a bit, and then we're going to bring Steve on here and get rolling with session one. What's up? How you doing, sir? Welcome.
Doing well. How are you guys?
We're doing
Wonderful. So
great.
good to have you on here with us today.
Hey,
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
give us a quick intro of yourself and maybe just like I don't know, the 30-second story of how Youth Pastor Conference came to be and how you guys have joined forces now.
Awesome.
It's like a Transformers, or what is that like where they all come together and they get more powerful? Yeah, so that's
Oh
what's
Voltron.
yeah,
happening
yeah. Or like Power
Voltron,
Rangers.
there
They
you
all
go.
just form
That's
together.
Power Rangers too. See,
Yeah.
a little after my
Depends
time.
on what generation you're from.
That's true. That's
Exactly. Yeah, give us an intro and tell us about that.
Yeah, well, excited to be here, guys. I was serving for 14 years on staff at a church right outside Dallas, Texas, in a small town called Forney, Texas. It is a country podunk town, and I was the only brown guy there. And so I was serving on staff. And so 7 of those years, I was the youth pastor. So I inherited a group of 9 students and just loved on those students. And by God's grace, he was able to really grow the ministry to over 300 students by the time I stepped down from the ministry. And so I really felt God calling me to shift my perspective from local ministry to global ministry. Didn't really know what that looked like. So in 2018, I told my pastor, hey, I want you to pray with me. If I'm hearing from God, or if I just had a bad piece of pizza last night, I don't know what it is. And so he prayed with me and he said, I feel confirmation about this. So in 2019, I started an online conference. It was just me, a word from God, and my credit card. That's all that I had. I didn't have an organization or a church backing me up. And so I was like, hey, let me start an online conference for youth pastors, kind of teach them what helped grow our ministry. Hopefully other people would enjoy that content as well. And so in 2019, we had 1,100 attendees from 7 different countries. And I was like, okay, God, I see what you're doing now. This is pretty cool. So One of those attendees, his name is Daniel Madry. He's the founder of Youth Pastor Co. And so he approached me and said, hey, we write curriculum for youth pastors and youth ministries. And I see what you did with your conference last year. What would it look like if we joined forces together and do the conference together? And I said, man, I would love anybody's help. I don't want to do this by myself ever again. And I'm sure you guys understand, like, this is a big undertaking to do a summit. And so, especially online for that matter. And so, since 2020, we've been doing it together. And so when we put the dates for 2020 on the calendar, little do we know about the pandemic that would soon come. And it happened to fall 2 weeks after the global shutdown. And so our numbers had just skyrocketed through the roof. And we had 6,400 attendees in 2020. And then it just snowballed. And so now, since 2019, we've had over 25,000 youth leaders attend our conference. And so this year, we're excited to have it in person, or I should say 2024, we're excited to have it in person in Austin, Texas on February 19th and 20th.
That's awesome.
Austin,
and online.
Texas.
It's both, right? It's like in person and you can stream online. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, hybrid version. Yeah.
That's great, man. Well, thanks for taking time to share with us. You're going to talk about building like a magnetic volunteer culture where like volunteers attract other volunteers, which that sounds amazing. All of us are like, yes, give us more of that. So we're going to give you the floor, and then when you're done, let us know. We'll jump in. If you finish early, we'd love to ask some questions. People ask questions in the chat while you're talking, and we'll see if we can hit you with some of those afterwards. Thanks, Daniel.
Sounds good. Well, like I said, again, thank you so much for having me. We love the team at Ministry Boost. And so it's an honor for me to be here. And so like I kind of gave my backstory, I was serving on staff for about 14 years, and 7 of those years as the youth pastor, and the youth ministry just exploded through that. And one thing that not many people know is, although the youth ministry was still growing and exploded to over 300 students, I was the only one still on paid staff for the youth ministry. And so a lot of people ask, how in the world were you the only one? You didn't have an admin help you or any other paid staff underneath you? What was the secret to allowing that much growth in the ministry? And so I always say the number one secret to growth, especially in ministry, especially when you're the only one that's being paid on staff, is volunteers. And so I was so intentional about developing a system of having a magnetic culture for volunteers. And so when you think about a magnetic culture, one thing that comes to mind for me is God's Chicken, Chick-fil-A. Can I get an amen from somebody in the chat? And so when you go to Chick-fil-A, the line may be wrapped around the building, but you know that you'll sit there because why? They have their systems down, but also number 2 is they're going to get your order right. They're going to make you feel appreciated, and you're going to be on your merry way, right? And so there's a reason why so many people are drawn to coming to Chick-fil-A over and over again. And I'm probably the number one contributor to Chick-fil-A's ministry, right? I'm such a Chick-fil-A fanatic that I spent 24 hours in the parking lot before one of their grand openings, and I won a year of free Chick-fil-A. And so I was like, manna from heaven, thank you, Jesus. And so with that, there's a reason why the culture of Chick-fil-A is so magnetic. It's because a lot of people are attracted to the culture that they built internally, so much so that externally, the workers that you see have a smile on their face. They're so excited to be there to serve you. And also, like, it could be in the pouring rain and they're still having a smile. They're so excited to be there. That's the type of environment that I want to work in. And so I thought to myself, why not create that same type of environment in the role of ministry or in the church world, and allow that to be so magnetic that other people are going to tell their friends within the church, hey, you need to volunteer in the youth ministry because, hey, guess what? We have this, and this. And really the word of mouth will go beyond what you as a pastor can ultimately do. So I want to break down a couple of things. And so I want us to look at this magnetic model like as a flywheel almost. And so there's a lot of components that come into play when we build this magnetic model of volunteers. And so I promise, like, some of these components be like, okay, why is he talking about that? But when you put it all together as a system or as a model, you'll see it how it definitely attracts other volunteers. So let's go to number 1, attention. So you want to make sure that you pay attention to your volunteers. If you're taking notes, I would love for you to write this down. Attention is the currency of care. People don't care how much you know, they want to know how much you care. And so, one way that we show how much we care about people is by giving them attention. Really get in their world. A lot of times, I talk to pastors that are frustrated or ministry leaders that are frustrated with their volunteers. And I ask them, when was the last time that you really got in their world and you asked them about their family? Or you asked them, how's your job? How's everything going on the other aspects around you? A lot of times, ministry leaders, if we're not careful, we can be so narrowly focused in our own world that we are completely blindsided to the volunteers that are taking time out of their busy schedules to help us in our ministries, that we are so consumed with what we're doing in our own world that we don't pay attention to what's going on in the other people's worlds that are around us. So I want to encourage you to pay attention. Like I said, pay attention. When we are creating a flywheel of magnetic culture, volunteers want to know that they are being paid attention to. They want to know that, hey, you see me as a person, not only as just some help to help you stack some chairs or to help you set up a game or whatever the case may be. They want to know that you value them as a person. There's one season where I was frustrated because so many times, there was a volunteer that was always showing up late, and I was wondering, man, why are they showing up so late? And I wanted to say, why are you always showing up late? But the Holy Spirit really convicted me, and instead of asking why are you so late, I asked, hey, I noticed you're running a little late. Is everything okay? When I changed my phrasing to "is everything okay," I wasn't asking in an accusatory tone of, hey, you're late, you need to be here. But I asked, hey, is everything okay? And guess what? He was able and comfortable enough to open up to be like, hey, I'm so glad you asked. My son is sick and I'm dealing with layoffs at my job. And I don't know if I'm going to be the next one that's going to be cut. There were so many other layers that I had that I really sympathized and empathized with his situation. And so when I took the focus away from what they can do for me, but instead I was focusing on what can I do for them, guess what? In return, they're going to do whatever it takes to serve to their utmost capacity, right? So when we pay attention to what's in their world, how things are going on within their job or their family, that speaks volumes. Because can I encourage you that we are called to make disciples, not just workers or employees. We are called to disciple people. And when we first disciple people, we have to show them that we care about them as people and we are in their world. So pay attention to what's going on in their lives. And so when you have more conversations about what they do, what their family life is like, you'll start peeling the onion skin from different people, and they'll say, hey, this is where I work, this is what I do. And so the more conversations that I had with my volunteers, the more I saw that, okay, wow, you're volunteering in this place, but I think you could be more effective if I shifted you in this area or this role. Prime example is we had a stay-at-home mom that really wanted to volunteer, but she just didn't like teenagers. But she was like, hey, Steve, I want to volunteer in the youth ministry, but I just don't like teenagers. Think about that. What an oxymoron statement to make. So I got creative in the way she can volunteer and help us in our youth ministry. So I had her, since she was a stay-at-home mom, I had her come throughout the week and write handwritten thank you notes to every first time visitor that came in our doors, and to write handwritten happy birthday cards to students that have upcoming birthdays. Guess what? She loved that role because that I was able to find a volunteer role that met her where she was and also that accommodated her schedule. And so because of that, she was able to give me 100% effort in that volunteer role. Why? It's because I paid attention to her desire to want to volunteer, but also worked with her in whatever capacity that she was able to volunteer at. Also, when I had parents come in and drop off their students, a lot of times I would see these parents stay in the hallways and they weren't doing anything while the students were in the sanctuary. And so I came up with this idea. I was like, okay, well, the parents are coming early, they're hanging out in the hallways. Why don't I just have them be in another position? So what I did was have parents volunteer to be in the parking lot. So as other parents are dropping off their kids at my youth ministry, what that communicates to other parents, maybe for the first time, is, hey, this church knows what they're doing. They care about my kids, and I know that they're in a secure environment. Because when parents see other parents or adults in the parking lot waving hi or giving out newsletters to the parents, so that way I can make sure that it doesn't get lost in transit to the parents. That's another tip, bonus tip. Don't give newsletters to the students, it'll never make it to the parents. But if you have parents give newsletters to the parents in the parking lots, guess what? That screams that we value your students, and we love and care about protecting your students as well. So parents didn't have to come in and spend all these hours volunteering for my ministry, but they were able to, hey, I'm already here, might as well be in the parking lot and say hi and hug some necks and shake some hands. So the number one way is to um, give attention. And another thing that I wrote was, if you don't already, I would encourage you to have a space designated for your volunteers, especially if you meet midweek like we do. I had a space where it was a thank you volunteer room, and that room had Red Bulls, it had granola bars, it had candy, it had Gatorade, it had different refreshments to really appreciate the volunteers that were coming in after a long day of work, and say, hey, why don't you go grab a refreshment, take a breather for a few minutes before you come out and hang out with the teenagers. And guess what? Because those volunteers really felt like I paid attention to their needs and I understood where they were coming from, guess what? They gave me 100% maximum effort when it came to volunteering. Number two, in addition to attention, number two is affirmation. Affirmation goes beyond just the generic thank you, but really, when we get down to the nitty and gritty, we want to make sure that our volunteers feel like they are seen and we affirm them. Hey, you're doing a great job. I see uh, how much intentionality you put in when uh, putting out the chairs. You're making sure that they're all straight and they're not crooked. I appreciate that. One simple act of affirmation or appreciation will definitely go a long way. And what I encouraged in my group of volunteers was, hey, if you see someone doing an incredible job, hey, I want you to shout them out before our next volunteer meeting. And so my volunteer meeting would open up with the floor, like, hey guys, there's going to be an opportunity for us to celebrate each other. Let's share some wins that we noticed with each other. And so when other volunteers would shout out, hey, I saw Johnny, the way he was really making sure that there was music in the hallways as the kids were entering in. Great job, Johnny. So even the minute little things that we feel like no one else will pay attention to, if we empower our volunteers to pay attention to other volunteers and give affirmation, guess what? That's going to be an environment that you want to be in. You thrive off of other people's affirmations. And I know that, words of affirmation is a big love language, but let's make sure that we really mean it from the depths of our heart. So go out with shout outs, and really affirm them. And so one way of affirmation that I found is, if I find someone not quite meeting up to the standards or doing the things that I've asked them to, I found a way to kind of critique them, but also compliment them. I call it the compliment critique cookie. So if you imagine an Oreo has two cookies, or yeah, on the top and the bottom, but sandwiched in between is the center, right? So you start your compliment critique cookie by complimenting them and say, hey, I want to say thank you so much for coming in, especially every day when you're working a long day. I appreciate and I value you. And then when in the middle part of the cookie, that's where you can give the critique. But hey, these are some things that I noticed when you're checking in kids, you're not doing this or that, or hey, can we work on these, tweaking some of these elements? But then I ended off on another compliment. And so I say, but I want to say you are doing a fantastic job. We love having you. We value you being here. And so when you have a compliment, then a critique and a compliment, guess what? The main focus is not just that critique, but they are also going to remember the compliments that come on top of the critiques. So that's the one way you can affirm others and make them feel good about meeting your expectations. Number three is appreciation. How often do you send thank you notes or have appreciation events for your volunteers? How often do you spotlight them as well in your newsletters, or celebrate a milestone where you are giving them, making them feel like they are the king or the queen of the world? Oftentimes, when you feel celebrated, that's a place that you are magnetically drawn to, and you want to be in an environment where you feel like, man, they not only affirm me, but they really appreciate how much I'm going out of my way to volunteer. So guess what we're doing now? We are paying attention to them, right? We are affirming them when they are going in the right direction. And number three is we're appreciating them. So you can call it the AAA: attention, affirmation, and appreciation. But also, like I mentioned before, when you're critiquing someone, don't just get on to them and just make them feel like they are the crumb of the earth, but really let them view it as a learning opportunity for growth. And so when you encourage, I always made sure that we use that language in our volunteer meetings. Hey, not here's ways to improve, but here's opportunities of growth that I noticed. Hey, we can work on the timing because there was a little bit of dead time between game time and the announcements, or whatever the case may be. So when I used the language specifically for opportunities of growth, it changed the atmosphere because everybody wants to grow. Everybody knows that, hey, we haven't arrived, we don't know it all, but there are still blind spots for me to grow. So when you make sure that you're intentional with the language that you use in your volunteer meetings, that is going to be a way for everyone to open up and say, how can I grow? How can I be better? And how can I make sure that we are pushing this ministry forward to become all that God has in store for us? Number two, another component, I should say, I think we're on number 5 now, is communication. Communication. And if you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. Clear communication is the compass that guides your volunteers. Clear communication is the compass that guides your volunteers. So I want to ask you this: how many ways are you communicating to your volunteers? Some people may learn from listening, so auditory. Some people may learn better by visual. Some people may learn by reading. So the more ways you are communicating in different formats or different methods, the clearer you are going to communicate effectively to your leaders or to your volunteers. Here's the reason why communication is so important. It's because when someone is not feeling that confident in what their expectation or what your expectation is, guess what? They're going to perform to that level of confidence. But if there is clear communication, if you're making sure that they have every tool, every system, every resource that they need to make sure that they are meeting that expectation, then that volunteer is going to say, I know what the expectation is. I have a clear communication, and I'm going to meet that expectation to the best of my abilities. So, the clearer that you communicate your expectation, the more confidently that volunteers can carry that out. One phrase that I started asking in my volunteer huddles that made a huge world of a difference is, I said, now that I communicated this, can you repeat back to me, what did you hear? Now, if you're married, you know about communication, right? You know, if you communicate something, they can hear something completely different. And I'm sure my wife is very certain that I'm, you know, not listening to what she's saying, but I am listening. I do understand. And a lot of times I have to ask clarifying questions. Okay, I heard what you said, but this is what I'm hearing. Okay, X, Y, and Z. So when you give an opportunity for volunteers to ask questions or to clarify your communication, that will help you in your communication and figure out, okay, I need to work on these keys or these areas in my communication. And the last thing that I'm going to say before we hop off is give a sense of ownership to your volunteers. Give an opportunity for your volunteers to dream, to thrive, to give ideas. Because one place that causes magnetic energy to come is not only where you feel appreciated, but you feel like your opinion is validated, and it's appreciated that you are opening up with your opinions. The more that you allow opportunities of ideas to come through, you'll be surprised of how incredible your volunteers are to help you become more efficient, more effective, and allow your ministry to go beyond the realms of just your 4 walls. one thing that I really started doing was looking at an opportunity of not just pastoring the kids that were in my church, but pastoring the kids that were in my community. And when I shifted my focus and I showed my leaders, hey, I want us to go from a place where we're just thinking about ministering in the four walls of our ministry or our church, but let's start ministering outside the walls. Guess what? My volunteers took that and ran with it. And so we started having volunteers show up to choir concerts, to band concerts, to football games without me pulling teeth. It was so awesome to see that the volunteers took ownership of our ministry and saying, hey, these students in the community, they belong to Jesus. We're going to show the hands and feet of Jesus wherever we go. And so those volunteers were able to go out of their way and really be in the lives and the worlds of other students. So guess what? That caused other students to want to come. Be like, yo, I saw your small group leader always coming and hanging out at our football games. Can I come join your church? Can I come see what's going on? And guess what? That was a magnetic opportunity for other students to visit our ministry, and it caused it to grow. But when you put all of these components together in the flywheel, here's what happens. Your volunteers feel appreciated, they feel seen, and they feel heard. And when they feel heard and empowered, guess what? They're going to tell other people, you want to be a part of this ministry because this person really takes care of their volunteers, and we don't feel overworked, we don't feel burnt out, we feel a responsibility, we feel empowered, and we feel a mandate in helping out with this ministry. I'm going to end off with this. An equipped volunteer is an empowered volunteer, and an empowered volunteer is magnetic. I'll say it again. An equipped volunteer is an empowered volunteer, and an empowered volunteer is magnetic. The more that you give ownership to volunteers, the more that they're going to tell everyone else, hey, you need to be a part of what this ministry is doing. This worked so effectively whenever I was on staff at church that I actually got in trouble for having too many volunteers. Imagine that. Getting in trouble for having too many volunteers because the volunteers didn't want to volunteer anywhere else in the church. Everybody wanted to join the youth ministry. And so I take pride in that. I would rather be over capacity with my volunteers than be under capacity. And so it's encouraging to know that this type of magnetic model of volunteering was so effective that I didn't feel like I was pulling teeth to recruit people, but instead, if I mentioned to someone in the lobby, hey, I think it'd be great for youth ministry. They can already say, hey, I heard some incredible things about the youth ministry. I can't wait. How do I sign up and be a part? What's my next step? So I want to join the guys to come back on for this. It was a quick session that I wanted to give some handles and some takeaways.
That was power packed. I love it. I know Nick has a question. I want to say something because I resonated. So many of the things that you said resonated, and I wanted to add something. I think that all those things that you said, it takes time to build, but I also think it's a mindset that can begin today, that we can begin to see that I am building a magnetic volunteer culture. I remember when I used to do volunteer orientations, people would sometimes ask me, well, how long am I signing up for? And I would tell them, I said, if I do my job right, you're going to do this forever, because you can't imagine not being on this team and getting to do what you get to do. And that was a mindset. It wasn't like that immediately, but it was a mindset. And I think all the things that you outlined were, you build that, they're going to do it until they're too old to do it. So Nick, I know you've got a question. Why don't you shoot a question?
I do, but before my question, so maybe I have two questions, because somebody texted me ask him to go hit the high points again: attention, affirmation, communication. They're taking notes; they don't want to miss it. What were the big ones?
Okay, sorry. Okay, so number one is attention, pay attention. Number two is build affirmation. Number three is systemize appreciation. And number four is embrace and learn from mistake. That's where I gave the critique, compliment, critique cookie.
Yeah.
Number five is empower with clear communications.
Yep.
And and then number six was a sense of ownership. Give them a sense of ownership.
Here's my question.
Yeah.
Because I love how you took something like, you're taking this idea of building a magnetic volunteer culture that by itself can sound very like pie in the sky or like theory. And then you gave a lot of practical. And my question is, how long does it take, do you think, before it becomes reality? Because you gave the practical things, which I loved, like do this, do this. And I like even when you said have your volunteers affirm other volunteers, like what I heard was you're building this culture practically, like real stuff in the weeds. For somebody who's listening who wants to build that, it's like not there yet. It's a different culture. Like we all have a culture. It's either the one we want or the one we just happen to have. How long do you think it takes to do this, to get from like where you are to like, oh, now it's that culture we want? A year, 2 years, 6 months? What's the...
Sure. I would encourage you to look at it, and I'm talking from a youth pastor standpoint because that's the context I was speaking in. But I looked at it as semesters. So okay, how much can I get accomplished within one semester in the fall semester? So the more intentional I was, hey, in the fall semester, I'm going to intentionalize on making sure that my 3 volunteers that I have in my possession right now, I can at least start the culture there. So that way by the fall semester, then we can start multiplying then. I think 6 months is a good kind of baseline if we look at semester approach. And the more intentional that we are, it can be a snowball effect from there.
That's awesome. Well, Steve, tell us thanks for coming on and talking with us. Tell us how people can connect with Youth Pastor Conference if they want to check that out. I am sure plenty of the content is great for kids ministry. Kenny and I are big believers that kids and student ministry is really 80-90% the same. I know some people probably disagree with that, but tell us how they can connect with that. It's in March, I believe, right?
So it's going to be, February this year. It was in March last year. Yeah, February. 19th and 20th. Yeah. And so we are in the midst of revamping our website, but you can look at our website from last year. Go to youthpastorconference.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at youthpastorconference. And
awesome.
All the details will be there. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Steve. We appreciate having you on.
Of course. Thank you for having me, guys.
Awesome.
All right. We're going to bring our friend Amy back. Welcome back, Amy.
That was awesome.
I love that. That was like a great, theory meets practical, which I think we all love.
Yeah.
Like you want that vision, but then you want.
And I love that too because Steve speaks from the perspective of he was a guy at a small church that created a really large student ministry, and so sometimes people they might attend a conference like this and say, well, that guy doesn't understand. He's at a mega church, super big, but it's not. It's so much of it's the same. It's the same work. It's the same intentionality, and so I love what he had to share with us today.
It was great. Yeah, I thought I was taking notes about what he was saying, and then I was thinking he was talking about my one question I didn't ask because he sort of answered it. I was like, how did that scale from when the youth ministry was 9 to 300? But then he talked about empowering that other leader to write notes. Right? That's not him writing notes. He talked about getting other people to affirm and build that culture. So you could tell he began leading other leaders to do the same thing he was doing. And that's how it scaled with it, which is great.
It's there's a theme here. As we've got some really phenomenal leaders who are pouring into us, and many of them are repeating some of the same things. Like we had this great talk yesterday with Tom Chef Nunes, and he talked about coaches and empowering high-level leaders that you could never afford, and giving ministry away to them and leading that way. I know, Amy, you worked at one of the larger churches, and you work with some of the largest churches in the country, multi-site, and you see that. You see churches that are empowering volunteers to lead like staff. What do you have to say about that? What have you seen that would have made those churches stand out? That really may not be any special from any other church. They locked into this idea of empowerment. Oh, Amy, I think you're muted.
You did a good job. You were muted when you were on screen, but now we need
I was muted when I was supposed to be, and now I need to be unmuted. Technology issues. Our friend Sue Miller always said, we really want people who are owners, not renters. And that's still one of my favorite phrases. And I see that at big churches and little churches. When you have people that you have truly delegated to, but trusted them. So, he referred to it as empowering, but you have to delegate and let it go. I think sometimes in ministry, we're the worst at being micromanagers, or it's not just perfect or just so. And we're really killing ourselves in the process. We're robbing people of an opportunity to use their gifts and to join your team. So, the most successful ministries I see are the ones where they have truly followed those steps. That was a great talk.
It was. Well, I'm about to jump off here because we're going to bring on a good friend that you all are going to talk with. Before I do, Amy, I'm going to tease this to you. This is totally, I'm throwing you a curveball here. If we have time later, I think it'd be great for you to answer the question, how have you, because one of the things you do in addition to your work with Orange and VBS and helping large churches as an Orange specialist, you also take on a couple churches a year where you go in, you're like Joanna Gaines, you show up and help them fix that thing up. You know what I mean? And so like you've done that a number of times. And so like the question I'd love to get to later, so I'll give you time to think about it, is like, what does it involve? Like how does that work? I imagine there's similar things that you're just helping with each time, especially as it relates to volunteers. So you think about that, and we'll bring on our next guest, Crystal.
Crystal. Now, Crystal, do you guys know each other? Amy, Crystal, this is Amy.
Oh my goodness,
Crystal,
yes.
Crystal, you muted? Check your mute real quick so we can hear you.
I am not muted anymore, but yes, Amy and I know each other so well.
That's so great. Hey, it's so good to have you here. I know, Crystal, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit. I know, but the fun part about this is I moved to Nowhereville, Georgia about 1.5 years ago, and always have to explain where I am. And turns out all of a sudden, like 6 months ago, I'm sitting talking to you and you're like, I grew up in Blue Ridge, and like, you know, all the people that I know here and everything. But so why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are, what you do, all that stuff.
For sure. So I did grow up in Blue Ridge, which if you're not familiar with Appalachia, just think about banjos and you're in the right area. That's where I grew up. Now I live closer to Atlanta, but I still very much love small town, small church. That is 100% where my faith story started. Today, I am the executive director of messaging and leadership training at Orange, which if anybody has the word "and" in their job title, you know that just means you had one job and more got added to it. But that's what I do. I do all things volunteers and leadership training, and occasionally editing and writing for Orange.
That's so good. I'm so glad you're speaking to us today, because I think a lot of churches will probably self-admit that they have dropped the ball in training their volunteers. Sometimes we drop the ball at the beginning of, like really helping our volunteers have the stuff that they need to go on. But then some of us, we haven't even thought about what might be an annual plan for training, or how do we continue to train people. And like, this is your wheelhouse. Like, this is what you do, and you think about this all the time. So we love that. Tell me a little bit about, a little bit more about specifically what you do as far as training in regard at Orange, and how you equip and resource volunteers.
Sure. So Orange has a broad suite of training resources for volunteers. It started with a book called Lead Small, which if you heard from Tom Shefchunas yesterday, he was one of the authors on that book. And it was essentially a job description for small group leaders. It was a how-to guide for relational ministry for people that volunteer in churches. Pretty soon after that, that book created a great foundation and then caused more questions like, that's all great, but how do I keep them quiet or make them talk more, or what do I do? So there were a lot of other books that came along. The Art of Group Talk is one of those. It's Personal is another. A New Kind of Leader is a fourth. So there are definitely books. And last year we launched into some additional video training monthly for volunteers, so that every month a church could gather and host a training, or they can break it apart and do that every week in sort of smaller chunks. But the idea is to kind of get everybody moving the same direction at strategic points in the calendar when it matters most to the volunteer. So that's what we spent the last year or two creating, and what I hope we end up creating for a long time.
I love that. Go ahead,
I
Amy,
have
go
to
ahead.
jump in. I need to jump in and brag on Crystal, because she is downplaying this a little bit. For me as an Orange specialist, she has transformed what we are able to help our partners do with their volunteers. So to be able to say to them, hey, when you log in to see your curriculum, you can also click this tab and there's a whole plan, and there's all these videos and a scope and cycle for when to train them and how to train them and what to show them and what to teach them. And that's all from this woman's brilliant mind. And it's really the coolest piece of our curriculum. I love that it's there, and I love how people are using it.
You
Oh,
know,
thanks, friend.
I want
That's
to
fun to
actually
hear.
ask you this, and we're going to release you to do your talk here in a second. So we're having a little bit of Q and A on the front end here too. But I want you to speak to that for a second. That you said just a moment ago about like there's some information that's important to train at specific times. Like
Mhm.
you made it sound like there's a timing strategy piece, which that may be new information for a lot of people. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what does that actually mean? Like, what are things that you train that would be better in the fall as opposed to spring and vice versa? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to talk about that a lot today. When to train and what to train, but things come up that volunteers need that they may not remember even if they got a training on it a year ago or 6 months ago. It's not helpful unless they remember it when they need it. So
Right.
things like in August, if I'm a volunteer leading a preschool ministry, in August, I need some training around separation anxiety because that is the first time a lot of preschoolers end up in a preschool ministry. And it is like, whoa, this is a lot. Or if I am leading a middle school or a high school group and we're about to have a dating series, I need some training about how to have those conversations with the kids, how to have those conversations with the parents. Even if I read a book about it or I heard about it 6 months ago, I didn't care about it then the way I care about it now.
Yeah.
So we need to figure out how to train volunteers at the times where they need it. And sometimes that's in our calendar, sometimes that's in our messaging calendar, but other times it's when stuff happens.
Yeah.
So a way to train volunteers when they have a kid in their group whose parents are going through a divorce,
Yeah.
or a way to talk to train volunteers at the moment a kid admits a mental health struggle. And sometimes those like quick things we can pull out of our pocket and hand to them in the moment are way more helpful than maybe the all day training 6 or 7 months earlier.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, we don't want to steal any more thunder and ask you more questions about what you're about to talk about. So,
You're totally fine.
Crystal, take it away. Tell us more about what you're going to talk about today.
For sure. So, if we haven't had the chance to meet each other, I told you what I do for a living, but what I tell most people is that I'm a lifelong volunteer. So, I couldn't be more excited about what we're talking about today because this has been like my whole life story. I usually tell people that I've been leading volunteers or I have been a volunteer for the last 20 years. That's not actually true because my mom was the vacation Bible school director at our church. So I don't actually remember when I started volunteering because you know this. If you run a VBS at your church and you happen to be part of the family where that responsibility sits, you are voluntold from the time you're like walking what you're going to do. So I would say more accurately, I've been volunteering for as long as I can remember. And after decades of packing the bags and testing the craft supplies and cleaning the church and decorating the stage and buying the snacks and doing the thank you notes and all the things that you do, I understood something that everybody in this room already gets, which is volunteering is a lot of work. And it's one of the best things that can happen to you. And that's a tension that we all get to manage. So for me, and in my own story, it made sense that after high school, I moved to a new town. I went to college. I quickly signed up at a local church. I was so excited when the youth pastor invited me to volunteer orientation. What I didn't realize was he didn't invite me to the youth ministry volunteer orientation. He invited me to the youth ministry and the preschool ministry and the elementary ministry and the greeter team and the offering team and the baptism coordination team because a lot of times, I don't know if you feel this, church leaders look at like young single college students in the same way that credit card companies look at young single college students with their perfectly new credit scores. It's like, this is new blood. And that's exactly what happened with me. And I sat through all the orientations and I loved it. Like, you didn't have to sell me on the idea that the next generation matters or youth ministry matters or preschool matters. But if I'm honest, as a college student and later as a young professional, I had the same question in mind every single time I showed up to one of those orientations. And it's this question of, is this worth it? Like, I know it's good. but is it worth it? And that's what we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about, because I think the question of worth it is the question every volunteer has. And as ministry leaders, this is probably the most important question that we answer. And here's why I know that. Because none of us have enough people in our churches that have decided it's worth it. I super appreciated Steve, who was on right before me, who had more volunteers and got in trouble for having too many. I don't think that's the story for most of us. And in fact, this fall, I've been traveling with the Orange Tour team, and we go to 14 cities in the fall and meet with church leaders, and we train their volunteers there. And I've had the same conversation over and over and over, which is, Crystal, we don't have enough people to show up. It's not just preference, like we wish our groups were smaller. It's we're not meeting the legal minimums for safety. And that's bad. And it's not just bad for us as ministries, that's bad for the kids. I mean, I don't have to sell you on this. You already know this, but volunteers are the shortest distance between the home and the church. So if we want to have an impact at home, because we know home is the most influential factor in a kid's faith journey, then we have to have enough volunteers, and we have to be honest with ourselves about how many we really need to be able to connect home and church. And on top of that, when we look at research from Springtide, from Fuller Youth Institute, from the Center for Disease Control, it all points to a kid's future is greatly impacted by having at least one adult mentor. But when you add to that list 5 adult mentors, the stats are off the charts. When a kid has 5 or more healthy adults outside their family, people like our small group leaders and our greeting teams and our preschool volunteers, when they have that, they're more likely to graduate high school, they're more likely to go to college, they're more likely to have good mental health, less likely to struggle with addiction or self-harm, they will have higher self-esteem, and they're less likely to commit suicide. So, and I know you know these things, but as we talk about whether a volunteer thinks it's worth it to show up this week, I just want to share that there's so much more riding on that decision than just whether our programs are successful. For so many families, the difference between a healthy, happy, God honoring future and maybe not is the difference between having and not having enough volunteers. So we have to figure out how to make it worth it. And I like to think of it like this. Maybe this is cheesy, but I like to think that every volunteer in every ministry I've led and every ministry surely I've been a part of has had a single piece of technology that made the difference. It's an internal piece of technology called the worth it meter. And basically, every time they show up, that meter is going, it's not worth it to do this, or it is absolutely worth it to do this. So every Sunday when they come into the ministry, or every Wednesday, is going to pull that meter in one direction towards worth it or not. And you know that this is true because you have a worth it meter too, right? Like, you consulted your worth it meter before you signed up for this conference, before you decided to stay logged on for this part of it. You had to decide whether it was worth it. And that's a good thing, by the way. That's not selfish, that's wise, because we all have a finite amount of time. We have to decide what's worth our time. And volunteers have to make that hard decision all the time. So what keeps me up at night, what keeps me thinking about volunteers most of the time in our churches is, hey, how do we move that worth it meter closer to worth it every Sunday? And what pulls it the other direction? And I bet you can think of a few things, right? Like, you could probably think of 5 or 10 things that might make it feel like it's not worth it for a volunteer to show up. I mean, getting up early stinks. It's the worst. Talking to parents is super awkward, even if you're good at it. The work we're doing really, really matters. And that can make us nervous and make it feel like maybe it's not worth it for me to show up. And I don't think we talk about this enough, in an increasingly polarized culture, this is harder than it's ever been, right? Like, we see teachers leaving the field, we see pastors leaving the field because our polarized culture creates so much pressure. And I think the same is true of volunteers. They have to be more careful than ever about the words they say, about the things they post, and all of that together just makes it feel like this whole volunteering thing is really hard. And it makes us wonder, is it worth it for me to show up? And as a leader, especially as a young leader, but even today, I find myself tempted to say, well, if that's true, if it doesn't feel worth it because it's hard, then I should just press the easy button. Now, feel free to make fun of me. This was already on my desk, but I should just make it easier. I should ask for less because then it might feel like it's worth it. That just being hard makes volunteering not worth it for us. But that's not true. I mean, that's not true for any of us, right? We do hard things all the time. We signed up for ministry. So we know that that might not be the difference maker for all of us. So maybe our goal is not to figure out how to make things less difficult, but to bring the worth it meter back the other direction towards worth it by making them more meaningful. As we travel and meet so many of you over this fall, we've learned that there's a lot of things that pull the meter back towards worth it, right? Like discipleship is one of them. You know that your faith grows when you volunteer. Community is another one that we don't talk nearly enough. Community among volunteers in a time where loneliness is an epidemic can definitely make it feel worth it. But just for today, because we just have a little bit of time together, I want to focus on one that sounds way less spiritual than discipleship and community. The one thing that I think could make every volunteer in our church decide it's worth it to show up on Sunday, it doesn't sound spiritual at all. It's winning. I think volunteers want to win. And I think as humans, we all want to feel like we're winning at what we do. Nothing motivates us like being on a winning team, and nothing demotivates us like the feeling of losing or not being effective or getting it all wrong. And you know this, those of you that have shown up every week to volunteer, there are some weeks you're going to feel like you're losing as a volunteer. I write volunteer curriculum for a living. And when I show up for my own small group, there are times where I feel like a complete loser. I don't think you can prevent that from ever, or you can stop that from ever happening. But I do think as leaders, we have a responsibility to show up and help volunteers feel like they're winning so they'll know it's worth it. And one of the ways we do that, just like you've talked about from several speakers before me, is training. I would argue that training might be the biggest difference between a volunteer deciding it's not worth it to keep showing up or it's worth it. And the reason I think that, and the drum that I'll continue to beat, is that volunteering is a skill. Leading other people is a skill. Leading children or teenagers is a skill. And like all skills, it's going to develop over time. We're probably not going to be good at it the first time that we do it. And that's true for us who are professionals in ministry. We still don't always know how to respond to a crying toddler or an angry parent or a crying middle schooler or an angry high schooler. And we're the pros. But for the people serving in our ministries, this isn't their day job. They don't have degrees in child development and they don't have years in ministry to draw on. And so we have to get really good at training them in a way where they can feel like, okay, I'm equipped, I can do this, and have more days that feel like winning and less days that feel like losing. Maybe a year ago in the Orange World, we commissioned a very small research study just to kind of understand what this looks like in most churches. And this isn't a published research study, so I'm just telling you, not telling everybody. But one of the things we found that has stuck with me, and it has honestly bothered me for the last couple of years, is that a third of churches surveyed, and this was all denominations, all church sizes, a third of churches train their volunteers once or never. And I just thought, wow, once or never. I don't think I really understand anything or I develop any skill in one lesson. But then never. I was surprised that that was even an option, and I'm sure that's probably not true for many of us on this call, but if we commit to training our volunteers once or never, I have to be honest, I think we're setting them up to not feel like they're winning. And over time, not winning will make it not feel like it's worth it. And I also understand, by the way, I have so much empathy for those who say, hey, I don't really want to do volunteer training, or I've tried and it wasn't successful. Because I think there is this myth in our youth ministry and kids ministry culture that volunteers don't want training. And I have certainly felt that. I know what it's like to hand a volunteer a book and have them leave it on the table when they leave. And I know what it's like to have volunteer trainings and nobody shows up. And I know what it's like to have volunteer trainings and then have the exact same training a year later and the same people are in the room and they act like they've never heard it before. So I understand what makes training feel like volunteers don't want it, but at the same time, I would argue that we probably, as a culture, we want training more than we have ever wanted it in just about everything. I know that because I watch TikTok tutorials on how to get dressed, and that's training. And my husband watches YouTube videos on how to change the ink in the printer. In fact, we watch a video on how to do just about everything. Later tonight, I will watch a video on how to cook the kind of recipe that I intend to cook for dinner. And we're learning languages from apps, and some people are learning to code on their phones. I just think that adults in general are not resistant to training, and volunteers don't hate training, but they may hate our training. And that's a hard truth. And as somebody who has sat in volunteer training for 20 years and led ones that totally flopped, I hate the idea of somebody walking out after all of that effort and feeling like I didn't get anything out of it. And so I want to just share one way that I have trained in the past and I wish I hadn't, and one thing that I would do differently. In the past, I've treated volunteer training like an annual information dump. I think that's probably true of the churches who train volunteers once or never. It's just a 1 year orientation. We're going to give you all the information all at once. And it makes sense because if people don't want to show up once a year, then we certainly can't ask them to show up more than that. And that's better than not training at all. An annual information dump is not the worst thing. The problem is it's not effective. Honestly, it's not how brains work. I learned this so painfully last year. There's an app called Blinkist, which allows you to listen to summaries of books in like an hour or less. So it may have taken you 100 hours to read this giant book, but it's only going to take you 15 or 20 minutes to listen to the summary. And I downloaded this app and I paid way too much for it. And I was convinced that I was going to read at least a book a day for the whole year. And I was going to feel like I had learned so much. I was going to be so much smarter if I could just read a book a day using this summary app. And what I learned was I heard all of the book's information. I heard all the main points. I didn't retain any of it at all. I can't even really name the books I read because brains are designed to take in information in small chunks and have time to process it before they take in more chunks of information. So when I was dumping all of these books into my brain, it was kind of just falling out. And I think the same is true of our volunteers. If we dump all the information we want them to have into their brains at one time, it's better than not. But it also means they're going to lose a whole lot of information before they actually ever need it. So if we want volunteers to develop the skills that help them win, we have to get really good at delivering it when they need it and in doses where they can remember it. So I want to suggest a couple of ideas for that. Some you have already talked about, some you're doing already. The most important idea, I think, is micro training. Building trainings in small chunks so that people have time to process, so that they have time to practice that skill and have time to get better at it over time before they take in new information. I heard some of you talking earlier about weekly huddles. That is a great way to do a micro training. But also, you know this, some of your volunteers are going to want a short training in a book form. Some are going to want it in the form of images, like social media images. Some are going to want it live and in person. Some are going to want conversations. Some are going to want worksheets. Some are going to want podcasts. And as leaders, we have to develop or at least have access to enough small pieces of content that we're sending it out in various ways that they can take that information in over time and in a way that they can actually hear it. And if we want them to remember and practice what they've learned, it's kind of counterintuitive, but we may need to say less and let them practice more. So say less in our trainings and let them practice a little bit more with the few most important things that we say. Maybe for you that looks like a weekly huddle. Maybe it looks like your volunteer email. Maybe it's a book club, but it also might be a Zoom call like this, or a monthly training, or a quarterly half day, or it could be all of that. They could all be effective, but the idea is to make our training shorter and digestible, and to make them more effective by lining them up with when a kid needs them most. So earlier we were talking about this with Kenny. There are times when those trainings are going to matter more, right? We talked about preschool having separation anxiety, but in December, your preschool leaders may not need a training on that. They actually might need a training on how to unpack the phrase Virgin Mary with preschoolers, because that's a tricky one, right? Or for older kids, at the beginning of the school year, we know this. Your volunteers may need some training on helping small groups connect at the beginning of the year. Like if that's a new peer group, helping them create new rules and facilitate new relationships is the most important training. But here's another training they might need. You can talk about crisis all year long, but many families experience crisis. Specifically, many families experience divorce around Christmas time. So if you know that's coming, if you know the holidays may produce more family disruption, more issues, more displacement, it's a great time to have a training, kind of counterintuitive, on the Christmas crisis. Or if you're leading older kids, the spring sex talk. We all know that we need training on that, but also training for how to have conversations about Easter would be really helpful, because it's kind of hard to explain what happened at Easter in terms that a preschooler can understand and in terms that a high schooler can understand when they can't see anybody physically resurrect in their presence. They've never seen that before. Or summer camp, like delivering training about relationships and relationship building and memory making at summer is so important, especially before we send leaders off to that camp or off to that VBS situation. So there is a way that we can train consistently, but there's also a way we can train that it lines up and hits volunteers at the times where they need it the most. And so a couple of years ago with our Orange team, we just sat down and said, what does that look like? Like if you wanted to train volunteers consistently on what matters in that moment, what would you talk about in August? And what would you talk about in September? And what would you talk about in February? And we came up with a scope and cycle, which, if you are a curriculum user, you've heard that term a lot. We use that to decide what we teach our kids and teenagers, but we need a scope and cycle for how we train our volunteers too. And so we decided that, hey, every July, we're going to talk about leading yourself better, so that volunteers begin some self development before the year starts. Or every January, we're going to talk about restarting and having better conversations. Or every November, we're going to talk about having closer relationships with the families we serve, because we know they're headed into the holidays. And so you don't have Orange Curriculum subscribers have that content for free, but you don't have to use curriculum in order to enjoy that content. In fact, it's all available at a link. I think Nick's going to put it into the chat for us. We wanted to go ahead and give you that volunteer training cycle with all the resources attached to each month. So if you wanted to use a book, or if you wanted to use a discussion guide, or if you wanted to use a video training course, all of those are already linked to each month of the year. And then the last thing is this. We have to gather and train volunteers often enough. And this one's tricky for me. Not just that we could give them digestible training, not just that we give them timely training, but that we give them inspirational training. That's so tricky, because my temptation in volunteer trainings is to go information, information, information. Here's what you need to know about camp, rooming, driving. Please stop saying curse words in small group. Like all the information that I need to give them, I want to give them in a training. And if I'm not careful, I could leave out inspiration. And that's really tricky, because the less inspiration we have, the less likely we are to believe it's worth it to keep showing up. So when we paint a picture of what could happen for a kid, and this is what I like to think about with inspiration, is what might happen. When we paint a picture of what could happen with a kid, like how their future might be different because of what you're doing, how their family might be different, how their high school years might be different because of their middle school volunteers, or how their elementary years might be different because of their preschool volunteers. When we paint that picture of inspiration, essentially what we're doing is we're asking our volunteers to pre-experience joy. to go ahead and pre-experience the joy of the outcome of their serving. And that's so important because joy drags the worth it meter like nothing else. Joy motivates us like nothing else. We know this. Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. But also Nehemiah reminded us that it is the joy of the Lord that is our strength. So as leaders, we have such a responsibility to not only give important, timely, digestible information, but to inspire them with some joy so they can remember that it's worth it to keep showing up. So I have mentioned one resource. I definitely want everybody here to have that. There was another that came to mind as I was thinking specifically about this group that I would not want you to miss. And that is orangeleaders.com/resources. Everything there is for this group of leaders who are on this call. And there is so much, you guys, that's free. Orange is great at making stuff for volunteers. We are terrible at telling people where to find it or that it's free. So I wanted to go ahead and tell you, while you're there, there are volunteer recruitment events that are free. The videos, the images, the sign up sheets, all of it. There are volunteer kickoff events, volunteer celebration events. Every script, every outline, every image, every postcard, everything's in there. It's already free. There's a volunteer handbook that's editable that is also in there. There's appreciation cards. There are conversation guides to set up volunteers to lead through conversations about anxiety or suicide or Christmas or sex or anything that they are leading through. And almost everything on that site is either free or extremely low cost. So I always like to tell ministry leaders that that exists. That's orangeleaders.com/resources. And the other thing is the Ministry Boost membership. Listen, if you're on this call, I know you know about it, but there are such good trainings in there. There are such phenomenal pieces of information by such diverse leaders that if you're thinking about training your volunteers, maybe one of the best ways to train yourself or your staff is to get that Ministry Boost membership. So I didn't want you to miss that. So the scope and cycle, orangeleaders.com/resources, Ministry Boost membership. I think that's everything that I'm talking about. Nick and Kenny, come back. Oh, it's Kenny and Amy. Hi.
Hello, Crystal. Thank you so much. That was so amazing.
For sure.
Can I'm going to tag on one more thing to that. If you are an Orange user, you can also reach out to your Orange specialist because we're going to point you to all the things that Crystal just said too. So I just had to throw that in there. Okay, Crystal, I have a question for you. If you were leading a church right now, tell us one thing you do.
Okay, this is a little bit of a hot take, but if I were leading a church right now, I think, I don't want to offend anybody, but I think I would stop pretending like adult small groups were the best place to find community. They're just not. It's one of the biggest bait and switches in the church. Adult small groups are a fine place to start. They're okay, but there is no community like the people that volunteer together. There is just something about people you've gone to camp with, people you've shown up with every single week that, like, those are the people I would go to war with. Those are the people that are showing up to the baby showers and the funerals. Those are the people that are like your true community. And in a time where nearly every adult is experiencing loneliness, as churches, we have the opportunity to go, hey, we have this phenomenal engine for community in our volunteer teams. We want you to join it, not just because we need help, but because this is the way for you to find some of your best friends. But we can't create programs that compete with that. So I think we have to integrate some of our adult small group programs with volunteer teams and let them be a small group together.
Yeah, I think that's right on,
So
100%.
So true.
I've seen some. I mean, and here's the deal: some people don't want to go to a stranger's house, and that's the way you do community until you get to know them, you know. And so, but a lot of people want to hold a baby; they want to hang out with middle schoolers, and so it's a great start. And man, my wife was a coach for 3 or 4 years in an early childhood environment when I was in Arizona, and she had the same 10 to 12 volunteers for all 3 years, and they walked through cancer together. They walked through the loss of siblings together. They like it was as community as you would expect in any other group, and they held babies and they did great ministry together. So I think you're right on. I think there's a place for it all,
I
but
do
it's
too.
maybe is a great first step in there. You know, I love what you said about micro training, and I think that's the secret sauce. I learned that a few years ago, that we would take like lead small at the churches that I've led. We would train lead small in 3 to 5 minute segments every single week, pre-service
Yes.
level. We would unpack books. You know, Orange has some really great books that aren't published anymore. You have to kind of find them, like the Marble book, Playing for Keeps, and we would train through that. So we would like do book studies in 3 to 5 minute segments. We train through our policies. Like, I think micro training is the secret sauce. It's a lost art of training. Of, you might not be able to get 100% of your volunteers to a 90-minute training, you know, quarterly or whatever,
Mhm.
but they're all there on Sunday. And if you can get 3 to 5 minutes and do that every week, you can get on the information you need. That's such great information, Crystal. That's so good. What a great resource. So I know that there's a lot of people here that don't use Orange. What are there some resources, or how can they benefit for some of this knowledge and resources that you put together that comes available to those that use Orange curriculum?
Yep. So everything that I talked about today was designed for people who don't use Orange curriculum. So if you have curriculum, that's great. They're not connected to each other. So all of the volunteer trainings, so for example, that annual volunteer training calendar that we talked about, we made video trainings for all of those, and they are
Oh,
all
amazing.
available to any church to use. You don't have to subscribe to our stuff to use it. It's all at orangeleaders.com/resources. And I think it would work for any church, no matter what kind of content they're using at any particular time. So all of it's created for them. The book Lead Small has worked for thousands of churches that don't necessarily subscribe to
So
any
true.
curriculum at all. And that's fantastic.
I love it. I love it.
So
Crystal,
true.
you're amazing. Continue doing amazing things like you do. Thanks so much for investing in all the people that are here, the people that will watch this later, and we're so glad that you're doing this with us.
Thanks for having me, guys. It was so good to see you.
Happy to see you.
Awesome.
All right. That was
Well,
fun. That was great.
Nick Blevins, that was another great breakout. I love it. I love sometimes just the practicality of ministry. Like, nobody teaches you what are the best ways to train. We just end up leading boring, ineffective meetings. We can't ever get anyone there. And what a great resource! And I love that that Orange has made that available. That you don't have to pay for. You know, like if you just want to dip your toes into the world of leading volunteers better. That's a great resource. Well, Nick, we don't have our schedule necessarily published or whatever, but we made some last minute calls and we made some changes around it. I'm really excited about what we got going next. Can you tell us what's coming up?
I am excited because we're going to bring on a couple guys that are leading voices in student ministry for decades. They also happen to work with you a little bit. So if we can get in any great stories about Kenny that nobody else knows, I'm gonna love that. But let's go ahead and bring on Josh and Doug. How you guys doing?
Oh my gosh. Is this really happening? Is this
Good.
I'm
Awesome, guys.
I
pinching
love it.
myself.
So good.
Hey, Kenny, it looks like you went all out on that background. Way to go.
Yeah, big spender there.
Yeah. Guys, this
He
is
tried.
terrific.
He tried.
You're putting this conference on together and you couldn't even be in the same room, huh? We're just
Well,
guests. So we're in the same
Yeah,
room.
we're right here. This is it.
Yeah,
This is it.
he's in North Georgia. I'm not sure about the internet and electricity. And I always say there's one traffic light in
Yeah.
town. He tells me there's three. I'm like, okay,
There's three.
That's cool.
There's three.
That's great. That's awesome. How you guys doing?
You're good.
Terrific. Thanks for having us at Multiply. We're excited to be here.
Yeah. Josh got all dressed up and
Yeah,
we're excited. And
Put on my best.
That's
For you
great.
guys.
We love it. We love it. We love it. And you got a TV behind you for some things. That's awesome. Sounds like you might be giving something away to the audience. But we just want to ask you questions about leading volunteers. You're a gold
got a
mine.
freebie.
Oh, yeah.
You got a freebie. That's awesome.
Well, I
Sure.
assume, let me say something first. I mean, I assume most people may know Doug and Josh. You probably know Doug and Josh. And so they're kind of like leading voices in the world of student ministry and have been for a really long time. I got the privilege to work with these guys for almost 2 years. And I have to say this, because this is something that maybe you can't say unless you've gotten to work with these guys in general. Because a lot of people point to like Doug Fields and like, he's America's youth pastor. He's influenced so many people in those ways. And let me tell you, I got to live in Orange County for almost 2 years, and it was a wonderful experience. But the number of people that I met in grocery stores and at the school or whatever, that when I told them I worked at Mariners Church, and they responded, Doug Fields baptized me. Doug Fields did this. Like, Doug Fields isn't America's youth pastor. Like, he was Orange County's youth pastor. Like, what amazing difference. And so, and I'll say this, and last thing, I'll stop bragging on him. We'll get into the meat or whatever. But for a season, they were my oldest son, Titus. Doug was his youth pastor. Josh was his small group leader. And they loved and cared for that guy, for my boy, in such an amazing way. So, real deal here, guys. So I'm super excited. They don't just write books and
That's
content.
very kind.
Like, they do it. Like, they do it. And I'm blessed by it to have gotten to work with them.
If Titus turns out good at all, it was all Doug.
Yeah.
And if he's corrupted, that's on me. That's on. I'll just take responsibility right now. No, he's a great kid, man. Thanks for having us.
Is
Ken.
he still wrestling?
He is wrestling. Season starts this
bro.
week. So you'll see some videos and pictures on the socials.
Yeah, Titus, we have an event in our youth ministry when he was in junior high. At least I know. Now he's all big time. But he was our Ultimate Smash Brothers champion. He was the man. So
He was the man.
you probably need to curb his video game time, Kenny, but great job. And that was a big win.
Kenny's playing those video games with him. That's why he's so.
I am.
good, you know?
I am.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He's
Thank you
training
for
him
that
up right.
Switch. It still has the Mariners HSM logo on the back of our Switch.
Yes,
So,
it's
we love it.
it's the best. Father-son time video gaming. It's the new way, guys. Get on board.
It is. Well,
It's great.
hey, we've got lots of questions we want to dive in with you guys. But I want you to take a few minutes to talk about some of the things that you resource, because you guys have such an influence in the student ministry spaces. And I want you to talk about co-leader and talk about DYM and all those sorts of things. But I know with Ministry Boost, we have a really large children's ministry audience as well. And I know over the last 7 or 8 years, maybe one of the most valuable resources we had in our children's ministry was access to DYM and the games, and those games work for second graders as well as they do for 10th graders. So can you guys talk a little bit about like the suite of resources and services that you guys have under DYM?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the dream of Download Youth Ministry. I started in a small church with a couple hundred people in it, and it's what I was raised in, my first youth ministry experience. We just didn't have a lot of resources. And then I've had the privilege of working with Doug and serving at some large churches, like we're at Mariners Church now is the church where we get to serve. And we have a lot of resources. And we thought, what would it look like if we helped youth workers in any context, or children's workers or adult ministry stuff? The games work for everybody. With high quality, trench tested resources that are fun and funny and engaging and biblical and all of that, but it's super cheap. You can download them and use them tonight. And so that was the birth of Download Youth Ministry. And we're off to the races.
Yeah, really the genius behind everything is sitting on people's hard drives. So that's what we just tapped into. We don't make any of the stuff, Josh and I, anymore. We did when we first started, but now, we've probably got 10,000 items on our Download Youth Ministry store, that 9,900 of them have been made by other leaders across the world who have a great idea that they use in their setting, whether it's a game or a volunteer training or a curriculum, and then it dies on their hard drive. So we just took it off their hard drive, cleaned it up a little bit, and make it available, and then we make it really cheap, and then we give half that back to the author. So it's kind of a fun, fun deal
preachers
for us.
pay preachers kind of thing. I like it. Yeah, that's fun. But it's fun. And there is a category for children's ministry resources as well, and a bunch of the stuff. You can just look at it, and it will certainly apply. One of my favorite new resources, it's kind of simple, it's dumb, but it's a Taylor Swift or Travis Kelce game, which feels very culturally sound right now.
Yes.
We try to, be ahead of the curve. So if you're older in youth ministry, I'm not pointing fingers, but I might be. You could still be relevant. You can still be current. Just go to DYM and click hot and new, and it will show you what's hot and new in the country, in the world, in youth ministry, on trend. But it's more than games. But I would say it's games. I love the games part. And so
I think one of my favorites, and this was probably influenced by Mr. Star Wars himself, was it Star Wars quotes or Old Testament quotes, and is great. Is it like really good? It's really hard.
Yeah, it's more difficult than you'd imagine. There's one, the Taylor Swift or Lamentation, where is it a Taylor Swift lyric that's kind of sad, or is it, from the prophet Jeremiah? And it's surprisingly difficult. People are like, what version was that in? I can't believe it.
That's awesome.
Well, what about co-leader? Tell us a little bit about co-leader. I've been seeing a lot about that. It sounds like that's been something you guys have really been working on and releasing, and it sounds really amazing. Give us a little bit of a taste of what that is.
Yeah, if you go to coleader.co, we couldn't afford the M, so it's just coleader.co. And really what it is, it's a platform for curriculum distribution. And so it is like a combination of Planning Center meets Pro Presenter. And we have curriculum on there that is made, it's ready from the teaching content to the graphics to the transition videos, everything you need.
Social media, games, everything. It's all included, parent letters, but it's in a really slick order, so you know exactly what to use and when. And then just recently we've announced no assembly required. So you're like, I want to use that series. And then you can instantly push present and it will take over your screens and go. Preloaded, all done. It's a magical experience.
Yeah, it's something we've been working on for a couple of years, and we just recently launched that, and it just makes it. Josh and I ran into a youth worker in Starbucks in our area, and he introduced himself, and he said, the reason I'm able to be with I was meeting with 3 students, and the reason I'm able to meet with these 3 students is because co-leader saves me so much time. And I said to him, we've been saying it saves like 10 hours a week. And he's like, at least 10 hours a week. And that's kind of the backbone of DYM is we want to do what we can do so you can do what we can't do. We can't disciple your students, and we can't meet with your parents, and we can't recruit your volunteers, but we can give you all the resources to help you do that so you don't have to recreate the wheel and you can spend time with your leaders. And and co-leader, just the platform, if you want to put your curriculum on there, you can do that for free. You can use the platform for free. If you want curriculum, then we have that available as well. But it works for children's ministry. I have some marriage content up there, because if you do marriage ministry, it's just a platform that organizes the content and helps you present it in a real easy way.
That's amazing. I love it. Well, we put that link in here so people can check that out. Nick, you got anything? I know we got some questions queued that we want to talk with you about. Nick, do you got anything else you want to start before we dive into that?
I got questions. I mean, that's all I got. Anything else you want to push?
Oh,
I want to start with this one because it was not quite a year ago, I guess, Doug. I was sitting in your breakout at Orange Conference about volunteers, and you said a number of things that I still remember, but one of them, well, actually both of them, I've probably repeated to other people when they've asked. It's about volunteer onboarding. And people will either take too long and they lose people in the process, or it's too fast and it's not safe. And you told a story about, not doing that one time, and you're really glad you were diligent there. You guys are onboarding volunteers, helping staff that are now doing that, learning that. What's the trick there? How do you do it well so that people stick, you don't lose people in the process, and, they serve long term?
Yeah, well, if you back up just a minute and you say, there's a principle behind it, and the principle is it's always easier to acquire somebody than to fire someone. And so a lot of us, we're desperate, and so we want to onboard leaders right away. And in doing so, we don't vet them properly. And so, most churches now, when I started talking about this 20 years ago and a vetting process and an application and that type of thing, people rolled their eyes and they'd walk out of my workshops and, like, oh, this person, we know them, they go to our church. And, now your church can't get insurance if you don't have an application or background check and that type of thing. So I don't think it has to be a long process, but I think it has to be a clear process. I think you need to show people where they are in the process and say, hey, if you are interested, let me just show you this. And you just have a pre-printed deal. You need to fill out an interview or an application. We're going to have a short interview. We do a background check. You just have 4 or 5 steps in there that lets the potential volunteer know what he or she is getting into. And then if they come to me and they're kind of weird or they're creepy or I've got some red flags or I just sense like, I don't know, I can stretch that out for a long time. But if I know somebody and they're interested, they want to fill out forms or whatever, have a meeting, I can fast track them very quick. So what it does for me as a leader is it gives me a clear path to get leaders involved in our ministry, but it also gives me an out that if I'm not exactly sure about this person, I want a second interview. There's just some red flags, or whatever they are. Like they're currently separated, or they just want to, mother hen or father hen their children, or whatever. I'm just not sensing the motives are right. I can stretch that process out, or I can get them in pretty quick. But I think it's honoring to that person to show them the process ahead of time so they know what they're getting into.
That's great. Yeah, and I loved how you talked about stretching it out longer. I think you said, so you make them do 6 months, go to that class, get in this group, just to give you more time. And I just think that's so wise. And sometimes you make mistakes both ways.
Based on like the application. If I see an application, this person has been in 5 churches in 4 years, then I'm like, okay, there's some story here. And maybe before we say yes to you, you should go to our membership class, or something like that. So, but I think we honor people by being really clear and concise on the onboarding process. And even if it's 10 little micro steps with little check box, and it's like, pray about your opportunity, talk to your spouse if you have one, fill out the application, have a 15-minute interview with one of our veteran volunteers. Whatever you choose your process to be, show it to them, because I also think it sends a message. And the message that it sends is, hey, we take volunteers serious here. And so you're not just coming, this is not like a chaperone for a one-night event. You're going to pour into the life of people, and we take that serious, and we want you to see that from up front.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. You guys have done this for a long time, and you've had long tenures at different places, and so I know you've had volunteers that have been in it for the long haul. You probably have volunteers that have like hit the decade mark or whatever like that. What would you say is the secret towards longevity for volunteers who make that? Because I would imagine some of those volunteers who serve for the length, some of them you find, but some of them you make. What would you say maybe is some of the secret sauce to building those kinds of volunteers, the ones that last?
I got 2 thoughts. I'll comment on one and you comment on the other.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm in.
I feel like there's a calling piece and there's a community piece.
There you go.
And
I'll take the community one.
Okay. I was going to give that to you anyway, because calling would have to do with like spiritual things.
Yeah, that's more his area.
We keep Josh away from that kind of stuff. But the reality about calling is that people feel a sense of like, I want some meaning in my life, or I want to invest in people, or I want to care for children, or my life was impacted as a teenager, and so I want to give back. So there's part of the calling that keeps people in the game for a long time. But sometimes, as most leaders know, that calling can get kind of discouraging after a while. And if you don't have the second, which is community, and I think it's our job as leaders, you talk about this, but our job as leaders is to create a sense of community with the volunteers that we have. So one of the reasons people stick around is because of community.
Last night at 9 o'clock, so our life groups ended at 8:30. We said goodbye. I waved all the parents and sent them out to the whatever. In our junior high ministry at 9 o'clock, we're hanging out at Chick-fil-A. And there's plenty of great sauces and great drinks, and the last few days of the chicken pimento spicy sandwich, by the way. So heads up on that, everybody.
Excellent.
But we are, our leaders are talking, laughing, swapping tips, war stories, that one kid moments. They're bonding. I mean, I think in addition to great understanding their calling and great community, I think their job has to be mission critical too. If you want a volunteer to stick, if you want somebody to stay, they've got to feel like they have something big to contribute. And I think that community just pours fuel on that. If they're mission critical, they know they're called to it. Man, community is the magic. I think it's not really a secret, but it's oftentimes one of the things that's pretty far down on our list of things to do. And so I'm thankful for my leaders who would go the extra mile to get that community and have that sense of togetherness and let's go and we can do this. Someone who's defeated can walk away encouraged, and someone who's like on top of the world is pouring into somebody else, and someone who has a lot of questions or is new is rubbing shoulders with one of our veterans. So Yeah, those Chick-fil-A moments, or in the old days, it was grilled out steaks at my house once a month. We'd have the steak out, and it was like, come over to Pastor Josh's house, and we're gonna grill steaks and talk youth ministry. Wasn't always a lot of training. Some. It wasn't always a lot of like formal agenda, but that community makes a huge difference. Pours into people for the long haul.
You know, one of us in here, I won't tell you who, but one of us does this thing called CrossFit. And, you know, the reason that CrossFit feels a little cultish, or when people talk about it, is because there's a community built around a common experience. Yeah. And that common experience is pain.
Dying.
Yeah. And so when you're done with the workout and people are just, you know, laying on their back in sweat, they've all done that together. They might have done different weights or different amount of repetitions, but they all did it together, and it builds this camaraderie. And the same thing is true with, you know, your group that was out last night at Chick-fil-A. Right. Is they were leading junior hires. And so there's this commonality of like, I couldn't get my group to listen, or I had this one magical moment, and it just keeps us in the game with one another.
And as he was sharing that beautiful illustration, I was just sipping a nice ice cold Coca-Cola Classic, because I'll work it off later at CrossFit when I go.
Or I've seen on social media, it's also for you guys is pickleball too, right? I mean, you're building some great community around pickleball.
That's something I can get behind right there. Pickleball requires 4 players. This is my partner right here. So we go hang out with volunteers. Skylar in our youth ministry, very, very good. Brandon, he's not very good. Easy target. We take him out. But it builds community. Builds community.
Losing. Getting taken advantage of. It just builds that community.
Teach some character, guys. Just teach some character.
That's right. That's right. Hey, how about volunteer recruiting? There's something I've heard you guys say before that I'd love for you to talk about, because I think it's something we should all do. And it's the idea of having an answer for every excuse. Like when you ask somebody to serve and they're like, oh, I can't right now. You know, I got my kid's sports and this is going on, or I don't know. And they're real. There are good, valid reasons not to serve during the season, but we get everything. So tell us about having an answer for every excuse, and maybe even some examples where you've used that before.
Yeah, well, there's no new excuse, right? So if you've been around leadership for a while, you've heard all the excuses. So I think a wise leader would then take all the excuses and have a succinct answer. So when somebody says, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have enough time. Wow, I know, I totally understand. And that's why in our ministry, we have volunteer opportunities from an hour a week to 10 hours a week. So they're like, I don't even know if I have an hour. Okay. Would you be willing to be a part of our prayer team? And you know, I've never had anybody turn down a prayer team. And what happens is when they get on the prayer team, then they begin to see some of the prayer requests coming in that we're praying for new volunteers. And, you know, when you begin to pray that way, if they're sincerely praying, it opens up their hearts to things. So whatever their excuse is. So my son is in the 4th grade class, and I don't think he's going to want me to be around. That totally makes sense. And I think when I was in 4th or 5th grade, I didn't want my parents around either. But we have great needs in 6th grade or 3rd grade, or, you know, so you just have to know the excuses that people are using to turn you down, and then have something, even if they say, well, I don't know where I am in my faith. I'm not even sure I'm a Christian. And, you know, that type of thing. You go like, well, what if we had a resource group? Because I think there's a lot of leaders that are watching that are, you know, full-time leaders that they can't do everything. But if you have a resource group, so when it comes time for an event and they're the ones that are out getting the igloos or the water slides or whatever, like, you know, you don't have to be a faithful follower of Jesus to run errands. So all that to say, no matter what somebody's excuse is, you ought to have an answer for them.
Yeah, the prayer group is a great idea. The resource group is actually really handy. When you need something, you're like, we can't afford to run out and buy this. Somebody in your church has it. And if they're on your team in a creative way, they're on your team. Not only are they praying for you, they're engaged, they're involved, but they have something that your youth ministry would benefit from. That's a great tool. Yeah, sometimes we offer things like, we just need, you know, youth group leaders. And it's kind of a catch-all for everything. You got to be at Wednesday night youth group. You got to be at Sunday school on Sunday, whatever, youth group on Sunday night. It's like every camp, every event. That is going to limit the pool of your volunteers to a handful of people that probably already volunteer for everything else in your church. So dividing up those roles, critical for success.
Yeah. That's awesome. I want to turn corner just a little bit. In our time that we got to work together, no doubt you guys could have been the guys that did everything at Mariners, but instead you guys invested in some young leaders that others may have seen as like, well, they've not really been tested or proven yet. I'm thinking of like Tammy and Chris that were young and fresh and they thought in a different way, and you guys empowered them to lead in a really big way. And I think there's a lot of other leaders that they maybe struggle with the idea of handing off like significant responsibility to somebody that's younger and maybe untested. Can you speak a little bit to that about how do we do that? Like, how do we find those people that may not quite be ready yet, but we believe in them and empower them? And what's that process look like for you guys?
Well, I think one, there's a mind shift, and the mind shift is that we don't have to work at getting older, right? I mean, like that's just gonna happen. We, in the church world, we have to work at getting younger and finding voices. And I think there is the mind shift of like, hey, I'm paid to do everything. And I would say, no, you're actually paid to develop leaders. You become more valuable to your church body and your church community if you can develop other leaders. And so, but sometimes people think like, oh, I'm paid to do the speaking. I have to do all the teaching. And like Josh does an incredible job of this in the junior high ministry, like way better than I did. I always felt like, a lot of the, the growth or the health of the ministry was dependent on my teaching. That's where my gift mix is. That's what I like to do. I thought that's what the church was paying me to do. Where Josh, sometimes is it fair to put you on the spot and say like he teaches once a month?
Yeah, once a month for sure. Once a month, at minimum. But also, I kind of want it to be at maximum too. Partially because I want to share the stage. I want to develop people. I want our students to hear different voices. And when I'm not having to teach, I can be a really good leader. Those are both really difficult skills, to run a youth ministry and be the primary communicator. And if it's always me in both, something's going to suffer in there. But I would also say this too: if you're a young leader watching this and you're like, when am I going to get my break? Why can't I have a leader that's empowering me? Be patient and be humble, and God will provide the opportunities for you when the time is right. And so I know sometimes being on the receiving end of that, you're like, oh man, they give the stage or they give responsibility away. But I would also say there's a process that God is refining you in, and you might be learning a lot of how not to lead from your current situation.
Yeah.
I mean, I think some of the best learnings we've had is like, we would never do that. We've learned what not to do with some of the people that we've followed in our life and served alongside. And it's not who we want to be. And so I think just be patient, be humble, and be hungry. And when those opportunities come, do the hard work to deliver in those moments of leadership when you're given that moment, platform, or whatever it might be. Yeah.
I think that a lot of the leaders that are watching, or a lot of leaders I've talked to over 4 decades of, leading other leaders, is that we are not very good at developing other leaders. It's just not part of our makeup. Maybe we weren't taught. We're good at like finding, I have a need, so I'm going to get this,
fill it,
either hire this position, intern, part-time, volunteer, and I check it off and
let's go.
I move on to the next thing. And so I think, I learned this when I actually 11 years at one church, 19 years at another church. And then when I started DYM, I wasn't working in a church for a season. And I was at a restaurant that my buddy owned. And I would just work there. I put on my headphones, but he owned the restaurant. And 3 booths behind me, every day he was meeting with cooks and waiters and hostess. And he was developing them and leading them up and encouraging them and saying, I saw this in you, and hey, we need to work on this, and that type of thing. And, after listening to this over and over, I kept thinking, maybe he only does this on Tuesdays. Or, then I'd be in other days, and he's always doing it. And I told him, I'm like, Morgan, I've worked in the church for over 30 years, and the church doesn't do that. And he was dumbfounded, as a business owner, like, No, that's what you do. Your people are your people. If you don't develop your people, you're going to be in trouble. You're not going to have a product. And so I took a lot of learnings from that and went like, oh, I just assumed because I've been in the church for 30 years and nobody really had intentional development plans for me.
Learn on the job. You're fine. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
really
that's
great.
true.
You know, that there's something that you said a minute ago about Josh, about giving others the opportunity to lead, to speak on the stage. This is a thought that I think somebody shared with me years ago, that if something were to happen to me tomorrow and then I was no longer where I was going to be, somebody's going to step up and do what I did, like even if it's in the interim. So the idea is, if I can find that person before I get hit by the bus, then the ministry is going to be better. I'm going to be better. So those people are probably already there. It's just recognizing it, seeing it, and then empowering that. Nick, I think you have a question.
Yeah, let me put a pause on that for a second, Kenny, because last week Josh and I we have this. I mean, everybody in the world has a podcast, and we have one called This Week with Doug and Josh. And last week, I mean, just a few days ago, we were talking about this concept that we call planned absence. And a planned absence is like, you're going to miss that Wednesday night or that Sunday morning, but you don't tell your team ahead of time. And then you kind of catch them off guard, whether it's the day before, hey, I'm not feeling very good, whatever it is, but you plan that absence and it kind of stress tests your leaders, because that's real life scenario. Like if you get hit by a bus, there is no lead up to that. So I think a wise leader every once in a while will do a planned absence where they can miss, and then people are getting the curriculum or the teaching or whatever your program entails. They're getting it immediately beforehand, and they got to figure it out. You will find out what quality of leaders you have when you do that.
Mm-hmm. And
I think you're right.
Off last Wednesday. Wednesday off from so long. It was so
in some ways we learned that with COVID. Like when COVID happened, we learned the quality of our ministry, the quality of our leaders when that happened. So I think that's brilliant. I think that's a really smart idea.
You guys, you mentioned taking a break there when you started DYM. You weren't at a church. I think, Josh, you might have been not there. And then you guys jumped back in with Mariners. And I got to see it when I was out there one time. Josh, we got to hang out and watch you leave middle school. Doug, we snuck in your marriage class that you were having. And I'm just curious, is there anything you've done differently this go around from what you guys did 10 years ago? And of course, you got a pandemic in there too. But even without that, when it comes to volunteers, was there anything? Or is it the same good things? Just keep doing the same fundamentals.
Let me first of all just say, Doug dragged me back kicking and screaming. I'm like, let's just do DYM. We're great. We're running. And he's like, I think I got one more run in me. Come see it. And that's just dangerous. I get there and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have showed up. And his heart and passion for the church has been decades and decades, drew me back in, and now we're in it deep right now, guys. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Sure.
No, I think the lot of the basic principles that have existed for a long time, they still work. People are looking for, how do I use my talents, gifts, and abilities? I do think people are busier than ever and more distracted than ever. There are more fewer people for the many opportunities in the church. But I think the community in particular is the one that is the same. How we build that might be a little different. How we train is probably very different. You think that's a fair, like in the newer day, we train very differently?
Yeah, I think we used to train, more formal meetings. Kenny, you were talking, when we were first coming on, you were talking about micro training. Yeah. We do that. We have this thing called Youth Ministry University, where we have like 100 10-minute video trainings. So people don't have to come to a meeting to get that type of training. We can kind of create a menu for them of what we think they need to learn, and they can learn it on their own. And we hold them accountable to that.
Yeah, here's like an onboarding video series for like the basics of youth ministry. Here's a life group leader one, stuff like that allows them to go sometimes at their own pace, and some people go crazy fast. Yeah. But allows them to get some drip training ongoing rather than meeting all together.
I would say that, to me, that would be the biggest difference, Nick, would be the training meetings. But we're also both part-time. So part-time, you have to be way more strategic with your time. in the church than we used to before. Like a lot of times before it was, hey, I just want to meet with you. I just want to hang. And now it's pretty selective. Like,
Yeah.
you know, so that's the big,
Yeah, you got to make.
but a
each
lot
minute
of
count.
the same stuff that that I did for the first 30 years of ministry, I continue to do.
Yeah. And in related note, if this is part time, I can't do full time anymore. I'm too old. I think because I was out late last night. Wow.
Well, ministry part time is different than some jobs part time for sure.
So
for
true.
sure.
It never stops.
Typically, it just means part time pay, right? It's not part time hours. It's part time pay.
That's true. That's true.
Hey, I got one more question for you guys, and maybe more specifically directed toward Josh, because this is something that I saw happen at junior high ministry there at Mariners. Talk a little bit about how you utilize your junior hires to lead in your ministry, and just like to give a picture. If you were to walk off the stage in the junior high ministry, you see a small army of junior hires running tech, streaming, like doing all this stuff. And a lot of people, I think, when they think of like junior hires, especially, they think it's not worth it. Like it's not worth the time. It's like chasing kittens. But y'all have done something like really remarkable from that to your Instagram weekly shows, and talk a little bit about how the power of leveraging teenagers to serve, not just in other places, but even within the ministries that they benefit from as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Kenny. First of all, I mean, that's very, very high praise. And you having seen it up close and responding that way means a ton to me. That's a very big deal. That's who we want to be. That's who we're shooting for. And so thank you. That's very, very kind. I would say similarly to how we're talking about volunteers, their calling, their community, their roles, their mission critical. I would say we have that same philosophy with our junior hires. So we have put a really high value on kids serving. And so there's a live stream that we try to do every week. And there's a kid that's the director. A junior high kid is the director of our live stream. And we take a little hit for that, right? We have a junior high kid who's on the drums, and he's not as good as the the adult who could do it or whatever. But the value of students serving is just really, really high in our youth ministry. Students that serve will stick in your youth ministry. Yeah. And so they find that community. There's laughter. I mean, if you sat in our little circle up before our youth group starts, that community is so strong. And I'll take it a step further. One of the young ladies, her name is Faith. She serves in our tech team. She was in a really tough accident. She was driving her bike on the way to school, and a lady hit her with her car. And Faith and she's fine. She had surgery and her broken jaw and all that. But the community that surrounded her was extraordinary. Like if she was a member of our youth group, someone would have got, small group, like someone, we would have cared. But because she had served and was part of this family of kids that were serving, the response was absolutely incredible. She's back now. She came back like 2 weeks ago, and everyone's cheering, and her jaw is still like kind of rubber banded shut and still healing, but she's back there running sound this week. I'm teaching. We kicked off a series on spiritual habits this week, and she's running the sound in the back of the room. And so we're just trying to empower students, help them understand their talents, gifts, and abilities, their calling, surround them in community. It's a really, really high value of ours. It's a little messy, and it's not always perfect. Like if you visit my youth group, I want it to be dialed and excellent. And it's pretty dialed and it's pretty excellent. But the value of kids serving and moderating the chat and running the lights or whatever, it's high on the list. So yeah.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out with our crew today and sharing. This is going to help a lot of people that are here live and the people that'll watch it in the coming days and weeks. And Nick, I know that y'all had a resource that you wanted to share with the community. I think there's a QR code that we're going to put on the screen if people want to grab that stuff, but some resources that Josh and Doug have put together for you guys, 101 thoughts on recruiting and keeping youth leaders. So
it's normally $10 and it's free. So go download it, grab it. I think let's see, Doug, you're in the way. Hold on.
Just push them out of here. We'll email it.
We'll just make it real difficult for you right here. No,
it's a challenge.
It's just a simple resource from Download Youth Ministry to help you, especially empowering your volunteers. Some of the stuff transfers to student leaders as well. So grab it, $0, normally $10.
Yeah,
so that's
but
good.
all the
That's great.
stuff on our site is real cheap, and you don't have to recreate the wheel. There's other people. I mean, there's volunteer applications on there, and volunteer processes, and volunteer trainings, and you know, if it works for you, great.
Yeah, if there's anything we can do to serve you and your church, we're totally in. Between Download Youth Ministry, co-leader.co, Youth Ministry University, we just talked about. We're in the trenches of youth ministry, and we're standing shoulder to shoulder with you. And anything we can do to help, we're totally down. So thanks for letting us be on today. Super fun to be here.
Yeah,
And if you
thanks
come
for
to
being here,
Southern
guys.
California, bring your pickleball gear.
Let's go.
I don't know
I'll
how
have
good
my
they'd be.
Coke
I've
in
never even
hand.
played.
It'll be a
Well, if
CrossFit, but I'll play.
Yeah, if you're playing with a Coke in the hand, maybe we'll have a shot. I've never played. I'm thinking Kenny's never played. If you guys could play with like only one hand, maybe that helps. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
We'll
we
see.
can hang. Let's do it.
Sounds good. Thank you guys.
See you guys.
Appreciate having you on. See ya.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, love those guys. They are as awesome in person as you see when you read their book or you see them online. They're a delight, doing great work at Mariners, and then also across the board, investing in leaders, and so many people benefit. So definitely check out. And I'd say this again to a lot of times, if you're in the Kidman world, you may not have really heard of those resources, but man, we use Download games, crowd breakers, conversation starters all the time in elementary spaces and other spaces. It's super great.
If you go on their site right up here, you can access all the other things like Youth Ministry University, the Sidekick, Co-Leader, all those kinds of things. And they're linked. All those things are linked in the conference guide, and we're going to be emailing about them afterwards as well. So certainly we'll make sure that we get that free code in there. If you didn't take a picture while it was on the screen, we'll make sure you get it in there. We'll send a couple emails afterwards with that, so you can get that free content. It's amazing what they've built with Download Youth Ministry. I mean, it started like I remember it starting like is that preachers pay preachers or whatever, shared resource hub, and now it's like 15 different things that it's like, what do you need in youth ministry or even children's ministry? There's like an answer for it there, which I love, because we love not starting from scratch, right, and not having to create something new. We're big fans of that. Orange does that too, right, Amy?
Yes, borrow lots of ideas. Borrow them.
Borrow lots of
Borrow
ideas. It's awesome. Well, we've got another guest coming up in a moment. We're going to let him in. Any thoughts before we shift gears and have our next guest on?
This is like drinking from a fire hydrant. This is amazing. There's so much information coming at me today. I'm a bit overwhelmed, but excited.
You know what? I'm glad you said that, because I sent an email out today. I think the email went out already. Maybe it's going out later. But we talked about a lot of times when you go to a conference, it's too much. It's too much all at once. It's like overeating. Like it tastes good and it's kind of fun, but then you kind of regret it. You say that wasn't actually good. And so here's what I'm trying to say with this. There's been so much content. Some of you have been furiously taking notes, and we're so delighted that we've been able to share all this information with you. But sometimes a conference is best digested over the course of days and weeks and months. Mm-hmm. And so all of you have gotten full access to this over the next couple of days. On Friday night at midnight, all the content goes away. But a lot of you have already purchased an all access pass, and it's on sale right now, I think for the next week at half price, only $49. And so it's a great investment in you. It's a great investment in your team. And you'll get access to all the breakouts, all the content, plus some bonuses. And you can take your time. Like you can sit down and rewatch some of these breakouts with some key leaders, maybe with some staff, maybe with your boss. And like, hey, here's something I heard and I want to show you. Can't always do that at a conference. You can just tell about, hey, I heard this thing, but you can take some time. So consider getting the pass or even Ministry Boost with our membership. With all the courses and resources we offer, you get full access to this conference, our last Multiply Ministry conferences, and all the other things that we do. And at a price of $27 a month or $47 a month, whether it's an individual or team membership. But consider doing that. Consider taking advantage of how do I digest all this information. It's so good and it's so helpful. And
It
our
is.
hope is that you're able to apply it over the course of the next season to come.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, do you want to jump to our next guest? He's
Would
here and
love
ready.
to.
All
Let's
right. Well,
do it.
we're gonna kick Kenny out then. It's gonna you and me talking with our guy Robert here. How you doing,
All
sir?
right.
I am good. Can you guys hear me?
We can coming
Yep.
in
Great,
loud and
great.
clear from.
Everything worked on my end. I was praying.
Yeah, well, that's important. I mean, yesterday our live stream went down midway through, so maybe your prayers
Oh,
helped
wow.
today, helped the whole thing. Yeah, it came back. It came back. We got it back, but maybe you helped today
Awesome.
too. Man, we're glad to have you
Awesome.
here. You just got a new role that you've added on. So introduce yourself to everybody who's watching, and also tell us about 10 by 10 and the work you're doing.
So, hello, family. I just believe everybody who serves in the kingdom of God as a child of God is my brother, my sister. So, I greet you as family. So, my name is Robert Purvey. I'm the director of partner strategy with 10 by 10, which is an organization that is geared towards making faith matter more for 10 million students over the next 10 years. And through relational discipleship that's radically focused on Jesus. And I'm super excited to be in this position. I get opportunity to meet beautiful people that are doing great work around the country. And so as we spread the mission, or spread the gospel of Jesus Christ on mission together. And so I'm super excited about the opportunities. I've been in about 3 months. And so meeting some very cool people, and it's a super cool job.
That's great. Amy, I feel like a bunch of our friends are all like working with 10 by 10 now. Lizette, right? You work with Lizette, I believe there.
I
Yeah.
do. I
Yeah.
do.
I know. It's like the thing to do now.
The hot
Come
new
on.
thing.
Go work with Robert.
Come on. I need more people on my team. So come on. I'm taking all comers.
We're probably
love
not
it.
moving to Texas. Probably not. I don't know about Amy. Yeah, Amy's not moving to Texas. I'm not moving.
I need you. I need you to start listening more to God, Nick. I need you to start listening more.
Well, it is warmer, so like I might be open to God's calling in that way, especially when it's January here in Maryland and it's 28 degrees or something like that.
Right.
So
Right.
that's awesome. Well, you're going to talk about developing volunteer mentors, which I
Absolutely.
think, in light of some things we've
Yeah.
talked about today and yesterday, is really important because I do think ministry is changing a bit where it's not. I mean, we talked about the Lead Small book. Like that was revolutionary for helping churches not just have like a classroom style of ministry with kids and students. But I do feel like there's almost maybe this next phase where we're going to need this mentorship along with the groups, So I'm curious to hear what you're going to talk about, Robert. Anything else you have, Amy, before
Me
we let
too.
him run with it?
No, I'm so excited. I think so much of what we've talked about we've said, you need to delegate, you need to bring volunteers along, you need to empower people. I feel like I'm excited to see how this really teaches us how to do that. So I'm looking forward to this, Robert.
All right,
Awesome.
man.
Awesome.
The floor is yours.
All right. Well, once again, hey everybody! Thank you, Amy and Nick, for tossing that off. I'm super excited about the time we're going to share together. I'm focused here on giving you the information, so I can't see your responses in the chat and all that good stuff. But make sure you're responding back, and we're going to have time for Q&A at the end. And so I'm going to give you about 20 minutes information, and I'll take the last 5 minutes of my time as we can do a Q&A. And so, as been stated before through this conference and other channels of communication across the country, that there's just this need for the kingdom of God and for churches and for organizations to really hone in on how to have ministry that impacts the seeker, the families, the kids, the teens that are coming into our churches. And one of the main ways of pulling that together is just developing volunteer mentors that can step into the life of kids, the life of teens, and even the life of families. And so what I'm going to strive to do in our next few minutes is give you some practical things as you think about, dream out, strategize around this in your own context. Um, because mentorship is something that's very near and dear to my heart. It's something that I've been able to do over the last 20 years of my career is mentor, but also be mentored. And so I honestly believe that the reason why I'm so passionate about mentorship because I've had and still have great mentors. And I think that may be your testimony too, that the reason why you're able to do what God has called you to do and be who God has called you to be, because you had great mentors, right? And so we want to see, how do we multiply that in our churches and in our organizations. So um, Maya Angelou has a quote, and she says this. Maya Angelou, great poet, has a quote. She says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." That people, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And when it comes to building mentorship in our organization and our churches, we come with the understanding that there is somebody for someone that will make something in them activate to be who God has called them to be. But there has to be some structure and some systems around how we make that happen, right? And so I'm going to give you four things. I'm going to give four things and write all four of them down, and you can unpackage it and add to it how you see fit in your context. But these are four things I believe that allows you to start developing a mentorship ministry or program that allows adults, allows volunteers to step into the lifeline of kids, teens, and families. Number one is you have to define your objective. Define your objective. Who's your target? Who's your target? I tell a lot of institutions that when it comes to mentorship, especially in the next gen area, that we should have mentors for kids, students, but also families. That what we're seeing is there are a lot of young parents who are coming to our churches that are unchurched, unlearned, and are seeking information and help on how to be better parents to their kids. So as you are defining your objective, don't solely focus on what does it look like to have volunteer mentors for children or just volunteer mentors for students. Also look at strategizing what it looks like to have volunteer mentors for families, for moms, for dads. Because as you know, families look completely different, and they come differently. There are some institutions where you have single moms, single dads, blended families. Um, and families come in different shapes and forms. And so what would it look like to have even mentors come alongside families and for the mom, for the dad? But you have to define your objective, and that depends on your church. It depends on how you're structured. But define your objective first when you're building out your volunteer mentor strategy. Number two, identify a leader that can manage and develop mentors. Identify a leader that can manage and develop mentors. You need somebody that's over the mentorship ministry or program, because what they do is they help you understand or help you um, recruit volunteers that you can retain to be great mentors in your church, in your organization. Because in order to be have a successful mentor ministry or program, you have to have volunteers that will show up. You have to have volunteers that will speak out, and you have to have volunteers that will lean in, right? So you have to have somebody that can manage and develop volunteers, because you need volunteers that will show up, that will speak out, that will lean in. You need people who will show up for kids, show up for students, and show up for families. What you will discover is the kids that are in your children's ministry, the students that are in your youth ministry, and the families that come to your church in this day and age are oftentimes families who are unchurched, who've been hurt by the church, and are seeking ways to belong and need community. What they've experienced in culture in some ways has been abandonment and been left alone. So what you don't want is for them to come into your organization or into your church, and they have the ability to be mentored, but there's no leadership, there's no consistency in that leadership, and they feel abandoned or left behind in that too. Right? So you want to make sure you define your objective, identify a leader that can manage and develop mentors, but also have a way to promote and emphasize the necessity of mentorship. Get with the marketing, social media, communications team at your church or in your organization, and come up with a way that emphasizes mentorship and the need for it. that it's cool to have a mentorship aspect, but if nobody knows about it or if nobody knows why it's important, you won't get the greatest impact. So not only do you have to define your objective, not only do you have to identify a leader, find ways to promote and emphasize the importance of mentorship. This is creating content, videos, interviews that could be shown at church, on social media, emphasizing the importance of mentorship. I'm gonna go left and come back right. Okay. Here is why mentorship should be so important to you, and I lean into this point on why we should emphasize mentorship. If you've played a sport, if you've been a part of any um, extracurricular activity, any type of club, or any type of not the party club like chess club or dance club, hopefully y'all not out there turning up like that. But if you've been a part of anything, you've had mentors. You've had somebody to come along the way and help you become who you are. And so when you are creating your mentor ministry or mentor program, emphasize not just the need, but also emphasize how impactful mentors have been in the life of the leaders of your church. Make sure you emphasize that. Have your pastors, have your leaders talk about their mentors. And if their mentor happens to be in the church, do a video or do some type of showing of how that mentor has walked along with that mentee and let them know that this is what you're building. This is what you hope to build in your church and in your organization. Because wouldn't it be a beautiful thing to build a culture of mentorship where nobody's left behind, nobody's left alone, nobody feels left out, everybody feels like they have a place to belong because in your church, in your organization, there is somebody walking alongside a kid, walking alongside a teenager or an adult, giving them practical and spiritual guidance as they take their next step in Christ. So that's why promoting and emphasizing the necessity of mentorship is so important. So as you build out your strategy, make sure you define your objective, identify a leader that can manage and develop mentors, promote and emphasize the necessity of mentorship, and then have a system that matches mentor and mentee. There's some software out there. There's different organizations that have that can match mentor and mentee because you want to make sure you're putting the right people with the right group, you're putting the right people with the right kid, with the right teenager, with the right family, right? So these are starting points for you as you develop your mentor ministry. You want to define your objective. You want to identify a leader that can manage and develop mentors. You want to promote and emphasize the necessity of mentorship, and you want to have a system that matches the mentor and mentee. So you want a definition of your objective, identification of leadership, promotion of emphasis and necessity, and have a system that matches mentor and mentee. All right, because what all this does, it gives you the adequate training you need, gives you the consistency you need, and it gives the opportunity you need to have great mentor ministries, right? Um, Certain trainings that you do for your mentors that will be dispatched into your organization. Make sure you have some. You can start off with some cohorts. You can start off with some curriculum that can help pour into the mentor, so they know how to be. Because one thing we realize is that sometimes people have the capability or the capacity to be a mentor. They just don't have the tools to be a good mentor. So sometimes training is needed to give them the proper things they need to develop and walk alongside somebody. And then consistency. Consistency is very important in how you build your ministry, but also understand why consistency has to be important for the mentor, right? Like, I really want you to grab this that when you are recruiting mentors and when you are recruiting people to walk alongside others, yeah, they need to be trained, but they also need to make sure they're consistent and consistent in three ways. I believe consistency needs to show up in the life of a mentor in their walk, their will, and their work. Consistency has to show up in their walk, in how they live. Consistency has to show up in their will, how they make decisions. And then consistency has to show up in their work, what they do. If you're going to have an effective mentorship ministry or program, you have to have mentors that are willing to be trained, but also are consistent in their work, their will, consistent in their walk, their will, and their work. And then create opportunities for the program to happen. And of course, based off your organization, mentorship may happen weekly, monthly, quarterly, or even annually. On how people plug in. Some mentors may walk alongside with somebody every week. Some mentors may walk along a particular group every month, every quarter, or there may be some things you do annually. But however you strategize, make sure that the volunteer mentors you have are trained, they're consistent, and they have an opportunity to actually walk with people. All right. So I'm gonna recap. I'm gonna recap real quick. Real quick.
Yeah, do it.
Give you a
do it.
Define the objective, identify the leader, promote and emphasize the necessity, and have a system that matches the mentor mentee, and make sure your volunteers are willing to be trained, make sure they're consistent, and make sure you give them opportunity to actually do what they do.
Love it. Love it. I think Amy has a question. Except she's muted. Is she muted? She is muted.
There you go.
There you go. We got you.
I'm not. That's so crazy. I wasn't muted, but
And then
I don't know what happened.
Kenny did it. We're just blaming Kenny, obviously. I mean,
Can you hear me now, though?
yeah.
We can hear you.
Awesome. So, Robert, this is my question. So, I kind of am used to talking in like small group leader world, church world, small group leader. So, can is a mentor a small group leader? Can a small group leader be a mentor? Are these two different things? Like, dive into that for those of us who have just kind of thought church world, small group leader. How do these things tie together?
I think it can be both and, right? So you could have a mentor that is not a small group leader, or a mentor that is a small group leader. And a lot of times, small group leaders automatically become mentors, right? And so, but when it comes to planning it out and strategizing it, I think it just depends on the context of where you are, because a lot of times a mentor may not be a small group leader, but a small group leader can be a mentor, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yes.
It does make sense. Amy, we did a video for Orange. It was me and Crystal and Paula Danielle, our good friend. And the question, like the topic was, and I felt like it was just along for the ride because, like, what do I know? But the question was about student ministry and like the challenge of ministering to students when they don't, like, just like everybody else in church, they don't come as often. So maybe they're not coming as often to your student ministry. So you could have a small group and a small group leader, but they're there once a month, right? And we were just talking about, like, it's almost like in the Lead Small book, there's that show up regularly. That's not the right word. But then there's show up randomly, and we were just talking about how can we also even push this further to show up randomly in the lives of students. And I wondered, again, we don't have enough volunteers to do what we do now, but I wondered, is there a model where there's a small group leader, but then somebody else is a volunteer that's a mentor that shows up outside? You got like two leaders in your life. Now the one that's a mentor probably doesn't show up as often. They're not coming to the weekly thing. So I don't know. I just wonder if people would say yes to that won't say yes to the weekly thing. I don't know. But they could be a mentor.
Yeah, I think that it's all in how volunteers want to show up, right? Because I think sometimes we dismiss that our volunteers don't volunteer our ministries, go into some ice chamber, and then come out when they need to volunteer again. Like they actually have lives, right? They have things that are going on. And so I think it's just creating an opportunity for that volunteer to make the choice that, hey, if mentorship is you walking alongside somebody in life with no set time to meet, right? Just based off of the mentee's schedule or the mentee's desire, right? Or the proximity they want you to walk with them. It may be once a week, twice a week, or once a month. But with small groups happen to be something we do systematically, or we may meet every week, and you meet with your small group leader every week, and that person ends up being somebody who pours into you more spiritually, that mentor walks alongside you more practically in your everyday life. And so it is possible to have both, right? To have somebody who you do small group with, but have a mentor that you do life with.
That's great.
Yeah, I love this. I just listened to you, Robert. It's so personal to me. I am a single mom who's raised three kids on my own for the past 12 years. And so I truly see how that mentor would have been, would still be very valuable in my older kids' lives. So,
Mm-hmm.
and how that could be different from a small group leader. So that's why I asked. But yeah, I love that.
Because Amy, what would it look like for an Amy, a single mom raising three beautiful girls? What would it look like? And that's what I mentioned earlier in my presentation, that when it comes to mentorship, where Amy's girls have a mentor, but also Amy has a mentor too, right?
Right.
You know, and so everybody's being impacted in a way that allows them to grow in their own individual way, but being poured into by a mentor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
I also know that Amy's been a mentor to high school girls, right? Haven't you helped lead a group before? And so you've been that too, which you too, Robert. I know we've talked about this. Now, of course, I'm going to out my selfishness here, but I happen to know that Robert has mentored so many young men, and some of them have gone on to play college football and then pro football. And one of them played for my favorite team here in Baltimore and now works for the team. And Robert's like, yeah, sometimes I might get invited to come up and be on the sidelines. I'm like, well, then I'm your mentor or mentee or whatever gets me on the sideline with you. Can you just pick me up on the way there? Let's get some sideline football. Never done that. That'd be great. Robert, thank you so much for taking time to share with us. We have a group, you know, a lot of us Next Gen pastors get to gather once a year through something that Orange does for Next Gen pastors. And in some ways, Robert, I feel like you're the pastor of our group. You know what I mean? Like when you closed in prayer this past year, I was like, that's the right guy. He just preached in an answer to a question. You know, you get asked a question and you gave us a little preaching, little 1 minute. And then you prayed. It was so good. I want to ask you if you would just pray for everybody that's watched. Some people are going to watch on demand. Would you mind closing? We're not closing the whole time. We have another segment, but I feel like with Pastor Robert on here, I'd love for you to pray for us. Can you do that for us?
Absolutely. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for every leader that has attended Multiply over the last couple of days. And God, we pray a special blessing over their ministry, over what you have assigned their hands to do. God, we know that the only way anything can multiply from our hands is if your hand is on it. And so, God, we pray that everything they have taken in, God, that you allow them to soak it in, allow them to strategize around it, pray around it, build around it, and that it will multiply their ideas, but also multiply their congregations as they serve kids, as they serve students and families. So God, thank you for this time. Thank you for this moment. Thank you for Nick. Thank you for Kenny. Thank you for Amy. Thank you for their hearts for the kingdom and what they see in leaders. And God, I'm so honored to call them brother and sister and to call all of these leaders family. We love you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Robert. Thanks for coming on and sharing with us. I love this mentorship stuff, and we all want to do that better. Thanks, Robert.
No doubt. Thank you. Love you.
Amazing.
Kenny, welcome
Amazing.
back.
Well, hey, we've got something that we got to settle because it was probably a little over an hour ago. Nick asked a question. He threw the gauntlet down to Amy. Can we revisit that question? And Amy, then let's hear what Amy has to say.
Yes. So let me give you a couple more context, or if people have started watching since then. I happen to know, Amy, that in addition to the work you do with Orange, which has like 5 jobs in one, you also basically coach children's ministries and other churches, or even just more than just the children's ministry, to kind of help them. And a lot of times it is larger churches because you've probably made a connection with your network there. But you go in and you help, and I joke that you're Joanna Gaines and you come in and fix that thing up. But there's some truth to the fact that, you know, all of our ministries through any history, you know, can have ups and downs. It can get to a place where it needs to be rebuilt. And as it relates to volunteers, I'm just curious, you've done this multiple times. What have you had to help them do to get volunteerism back to a healthy place, to get that house in order?
Right. So, you know, each one is unique. So, but I see some patterns that tend to show up in every church, no matter the size, is my guess. So after you asked me that, I jotted down my top 3. So, you know, first of all, I think that most of them apologize for asking people to serve in their ministry. And
Mm.
you've probably been there and done this, but like, would you just step in this week?
Yeah.
Or would you just, if you could just help me just get through this one Sunday, instead of like being proud of what you are a part of and inviting people in. um, I think we forget that people want to be asked to do something significant.
Mm.
And so instead of apologizing to for asking them to be a part of it, like, ask them to step up and to be a part. The second thing I would say is, a very wise counselor of mine said, "You get what you allow." And so I'll go in and they'll say, "We just can't get people to serve every week." And I'll say, "Well, is there any other option?" And they say, "Well, yeah, some people can serve every other month or every other week or on a rotation." And I look at their chart of how they keep track of their volunteers, and it gives me a migraine just looking at it. Like, it's so overwhelming. And I'm like, how about if you serve in kids ministry, it's a weekly position. Um, because if you offer 14 different ways for them to find the path of least resistance, that's what they're going to take. So let's redefine what it means to serve in kids and how to be consistent and show up for those kids. And let's start to coach our people on the why behind that. Like, why is that the best for kids? I always tell people our job is not to do what's most convenient for adults, but to do what's best for the kids in our ministry. And we forget that, and we start to cater to the adults instead of going, this isn't the best way for the children we serve. Um, and then I would say the third thing that I see is their database is a mess. It's it's
So true.
just a mess. And this is pretty consistent amongst all the churches I've worked with. So, I'm like, your volunteers partly aren't bought in because they don't know who they're serving week to week. They're serving the first grade instead of, I'm serving this list of 10 kids, and these are my kids, and this is who I'm showing up for, and this is who I'm going to do life with. And a lot of that ties in with the data. The data's not clean. They don't really know who's coming. They don't know which services they're coming to. And so it leaves a lot of confusion for parents. It leaves a lot of confusion for those volunteers too. So I think that's probably the thing that trips most people up, because it's a lot of work to clean up your database. It
Yeah.
just is. I always tell them this is gonna be hard. It's gonna take us several months. In the long run, it's gonna be worth it, but it's tough.
Yeah, that's true. Kenny
That's
knows
awesome.
this all too well because we help leaders with volunteer recruiting, and one of the first questions Kenny will ask is, how many volunteers do you need? And people will say, well, I'm not really sure. A
Right.
lot. Let me, I just need a lot. And then it's like, how many do you have? Well, I'm not really sure either. How many people in the church are serving? Oh, I really don't know that. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
It's a
how many are
puzzle.
not serving?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a
That's
puzzle.
true.
Right. I know
And
you
it
guys
does,
would your list is probably very similar to mine, right?
yeah, and it does tie back. As funny as that sounds, it does tie back to your database, because, and I think I learned this from Jim Weidman, is go to the Bible. The shepherd knew his sheep. He knew when one was
Right.
missing, and I think we have to be responsible in the same way. Do we know our sheep, which include our volunteers? Do we know how many more we need? So I think it's all really important. Well, we're getting ready to launch into our final session here. We're going to go just a tad long, so we'd love to have you stick with us if you can. But before we do that, just a reminder to those of you that maybe aren't as familiar with Minister Boost, what we do, all those things. We'd love to invite you, as you've had an opportunity to enjoy this conference and such. This is just a tip of the iceberg of what we do. We do webinars and events like this all the time, but we've got 50 plus resources and courses. A lot of what you've heard about today and yesterday, we go into a lot of detail in like 6 to 8 unit courses of how to unpack this around volunteers. One of my favorite courses I wrote was Bridging the Volunteer Gap. Like, you've got this situation where you have so many volunteers to recruit, you're so far behind, I don't even know where to start. We've got courses on onboarding volunteers, courses on launching small groups, launching coaches, and are one of our favorite things. We've got a course that we're actually in the process of rebuilding. It's called Volunteer Boost. We're getting ready to change it, and we're just going to call it Recruiter. And it's basically how to rebuild your volunteer recruiting system from start to finish, and build an efficient system to recruit. So we'd love to have you check it out. Come look through our courses. It's so affordable. $27 a month gives you access to everything that we do. $47 for your entire team, whether you have 2 people or 100 people. And in addition, every January, February, we launch cohort coaching groups for kids pastors, youth pastors, next gen family ministers. So, and if you're a member, you get a big discount on all that. So we love to have you join the Ministry Boost family. We have a lot of fun. We're in it to help each other out and to walk alongside each other because we need community too.
It's true. That's true. And we love it. Like we said, we love not creating things from scratch. So there's a lot of documents in there too. So it's not like just courses, like just teaching you. A lot of the courses have files, documents, things you can kind of edit, and there's some resource bundles in there too.
You looking for a good policy manual? We got 12. You looking for a good application or job description? We got some of those, baby.
Who wants to write one of those from scratch? I mean,
Not me.
Nothing. Even a job description. In fact, I saw somebody commented yesterday when we were talking about coaches with Chef. Do you have a volunteer job description for a coach? I was like,
hundreds.
Yeah, I got like 24. Maybe hundreds. I don't know. But and I was too busy to comment like a link to it. But I was like, we got them. They're in there. All right, we ready for our last conversation?
Yeah,
we teased it yesterday. We're going to talk with Brittany Nelson about her new book, Leveraging Digital, but specifically about how can we leverage digital when leading volunteers. Join us for the Multiply Ministry Conference. We appreciate you coming on with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We want to talk about your new book, A Time to Update, and then talk about, this whole conference is about empowering. Yeah, there it is. We want to talk about empowering volunteers, and your book with leveraging digital strategies certainly can help. So tell us about the book, and then let's talk about how that can relate to leading and empowering volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called Time to Update: 7 Areas to Integrate Digital Discipleship into Your Children's Ministry Strategy. And so it really covers 7 different areas of children's ministry, including your volunteers, and talks about how we can utilize the digital world to do ministry more effectively and efficiently with the next generation. So there's a whole chapter focused exclusively on volunteers and what does it look like to use technology and the digital world to help us recruit them, train them, communicate with them, like all the things that come with volunteer coordination and leadership. There's a whole chapter in the book that talks about it.
Yeah, and I would say, and the book is geared towards children's ministry, but
Yes.
this conference, this is helpful for anybody who leads volunteers, and even your book, I would say, I don't know, at least 70% of it probably is helpful regardless of the ministry you're in, especially.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, especially what we're talking about with volunteers. So let's start with probably one of the biggest things people care about, recruiting and training. What does that look like? What are some ways that we can leverage digital to help recruit and train volunteers?
Sure. So I think a big part of recruitment is being being present, right? Being constantly, I don't want to say in someone's face because that has a negative connotation.
Maybe if you're really desperate, like,
Sure.
no, I'm just kidding.
Maybe, but just being present everywhere, right? Like being everywhere anywhere someone looks, they see, hey, this could be an opportunity to join the children's or the youth ministry. So I think technology has gives us great opportunities to do that, whether it's through social media or using graphic programs like Canva or Photoshop to create graphically pleasing and engaging posters and flyers, like emails that can go out, right? Like whatever we can do to communicate the vision of our ministry, that's going to draw people in. And that's going to be a lot more effective than, hey, we need somebody to cover for us on Sunday mornings in the 2nd grade small group. Are you available? Right? But when we communicate the vision of our ministry and use the digital world to help us do that in a more engaging way and in several different touch points too. So maybe they see it on a Sunday morning, they see it on a slide that goes across the screen before service. They hear about it in the service. It's in the weekly email. It also shows up on social media. It just gives people multiple ways to connect and to see that there are opportunities to serve. I've also seen a lot of churches have a lot of success with QR codes. And so whether they put a QR code on a flyer or like a little business card that sits in the chairs, like in those back pockets on the chairs, and it just says, hey, we'd love to have you serve with our volunteer team. Scan the QR code for more information. And then that QR code can send them to an area, a landing page that has um, the needed positions, or that gives kind of walks them through the next steps of what it looks like to volunteer at your church. And so, yeah, I think QR codes have been a really, really popular and effective way to recruit new volunteers, making it easy for them to kind of onboard and join the team.
Well, and I like that it's working while you're not working in a sense. Like, you know what I mean? Like a QR code on a TV in the lobby is always working, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I would
Yeah.
say that, the results are probably, it's not as good, obviously, if you were actually talking to people and all that, but
Sure.
you're not doing anything. So that's nice too, that it's like they're always recruiting all
Yeah.
the time, every week. And even if you just get a trickle of volunteers, it's like your website. You said your website, social. So all of these feel like they can be because you started by saying you're everywhere. You're like the presence.
Mhm.
And I think
Yeah.
that's an important thing, because a lot of times most ministries, I know this is true for kids ministry, a lot of
Sure.
leaders feel like it's hidden, right? Like we're
Mhm.
back in this part of the building and nobody knows what we need or what the needs are,
What
what
goes
the
on right
opportunities are. Yeah,
there.
yeah. Everything looks like it's okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll hear that a lot. Leader will say, people think we don't need help because, it's running
Mhm.
well. They don't know. Like they haven't seen behind the scenes that we just opened that room and combined that. 4 volunteers called out this morning or whatever. So I
Mhm.
love that. That's good. Digital is definitely helpful there. How about with connecting with and caring for volunteers? What are some ways we can leverage
Mhm.
digital there?
Yeah, I think this is really the digital world can really be valuable, even in just kind of the administrative side of caring for our volunteers, of
Hmm.
keeping track of who haven't we seen in a while, who has called out sick for the past 3 weeks, and kind of keeping better track of what our volunteers are even up to, and even social media. Like we live in an age now where we can know what's going on in someone's life without actually even having to talk to them because
Uh-huh.
of social
Yep.
media, and so like how often do we get on social media for the purpose of checking up on our volunteers and seeing what they're up to, not in like a creepy, like stalkerish way, right? But just to
Yeah.
say, like, hey, what are they celebrating? And how can I join them in that celebration? Or what's something, that maybe a family struggle that they're going through, or a death in the family, like something, a challenge that their family is facing, and how can I come alongside to support them in that? And so using social media, I think, to care for our volunteers, of just knowing what's going on with them can be really, really valuable. So just seeing, what they post about on social media, and then the way that we connect with them, right? There's so many different touch points, different ways that we can stay connected. Our church uses a volunteer Facebook group. That's a great way to stay connected. It keeps all of our volunteers connected with each other. I know some churches who are using Slack for their volunteer teams. That's been really effective for them to stay connected, and yeah, not be going beyond just, hey, you're here to serve for me on a Sunday
Yeah.
morning or a Wednesday night, but like really doing life with these people. And then,
Yeah.
like I said, using the digital tools to help you keep track of, even if it's just a simple spreadsheet, right, on Google
Sure.
Sheet, but having a way to say, like, okay, I've written this person a note, or I had coffee with this person, check, and kind of keeping that running tally, keeping almost a roster of your volunteers, and keeping better track of how you're engaging them and how you're connecting with them.
Yeah. I have to ask about the Facebook group. Has
Mhm.
that's all volunteers in the whole church? So it's probably a little bit
So
of a
it's
larger
just
group, or is it
volunteers
just
in the children's ministry. So
just
it's
in
just the
kids
children's
ministry? Okay.
ministry volunteers. Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
Here's what I'm wondering. I'm asking because we've done similar things to that too. We've done it for parents, and
Mhm.
is that group like, has it got to the point where it kind of manages itself in the sense that people comment, ask
Yeah,
questions?
pretty much. So our
Okay.
children's pastor posts encouragements and, hey
Yeah,
guys, I found this awesome blog post about teaching kids, or whatever. And so she'll
that's
she'll
great.
share training with us in that way. Going back to the first question of, she shares
Yeah.
training with us in that way. But then it's also a place where, like, I'm gonna be out of town in a couple of weeks on a Sunday morning, and so I was able to post in the group, hey guys, I'm gonna be out of
Okay.
town. Can anybody take my place? And the people will
Yeah.
comment and say, like, oh, I can do it, or I'll cover for you. And so it's even a way for us to be able to find coverage for when we can't be there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it pretty much runs itself. I don't think
That's
doesn't
great.
seem like it adds a lot of extra work on our children's pastor. So
Yeah, there's like sometimes there's not enough people in a group, even if
sure.
there's literally hundreds, where that doesn't have enough traction, and then sometimes there's so many
Yeah.
A friend of mine's on staff at a large church. They have a parent Facebook group that she let me join just to see how it works. And it's large enough that it runs itself. In fact, there was a post in there recently where I thought there's probably going to need to be a moderator on this.
Yeah.
Sometimes that happens in those kinds of groups. Hopefully, don't have to worry about that with a group with volunteers. Our student ministry started using Slack. I know our student pastor has enjoyed that. I think it's one of those things where you have to commit to using it, right? Like you can't say we're using it and then nobody checks it for 3 weeks. But they have loved that because they do get all of that, all the different forms of communication too, because you can do audio, video, you're chatting, all that in there. So I think they've liked that. That's good. Well, that also kind of speaks to my next question, which is communicating. How about leveraging digital for communicating with volunteers? I mean, it could be Slack, could be someone in a Facebook group, but I'm sure your kids' pastors using other methods too. What do you like?
Yeah, so I think email obviously is a big one, right? Communicating with volunteers, but then even kind of going beyond that, going deeper into some of the, like, not just the tools, which I know we'll talk about at the end a little bit, but going deeper beyond kind of like what they do to the strategy behind it. And so using the digital world in your communication strategy. And so again, kind of going back to the same thing with recruiting, like making sure that you're everywhere, like use the shotgun approach of texting, email, social media posts, all Slack notifications, like all the things to communicate with your volunteers. And I think a key part of this too is knowing how your volunteers like to be communicated with, right? There's our church is in a location where we have, I think, 3 very large retirement communities all within a mile of our church. And so that influences, right, the age of our
You're using
volunteers.
TikTok, Snapchat,
right.
things like that. Sure. Yeah, we understand.
So asking your volunteers, right, like, hey, would you prefer to get a text message or an email? And kind of following up with that and communicating with your team in the way that they prefer to be communicated with is going to be the most effective, right? Like we could say, oh, this is what we do. This is what we do. These are these awesome tools. But you've got to find what works for your specific volunteer team and use that.
Yeah. And you bring up something that I didn't know we'd go here. So now I'm going to have to go here because I have to ask. I think one of the tensions to manage is people do communicate differently. Like, certain people do live on social media and the way you would find out about something in their life is there first.
Sure.
And then some people do still check email. I know that a lot of times we always act like email's dead and that's just not true. A lot of people hate it, but there's still people that's primarily where they're communicating, finding out about things. So a lot of people do prefer text. How do you think leaders can manage that tension of like, man, there's 20 platforms, you know what I mean? Or whatever.
Sure.
So we got to cater a little bit to volunteers, but I also can't do the same thing 15
all
times.
the things.
Yeah. Do you pick a few and just major in that?
Yeah,
or what do you think?
that's what I would say is ask your volunteers first what they use, and you'll probably get 5 different answers. And of those 5, pick the 2, maybe 3, but I would start with the 2 methods that are most common. And then in your training of volunteers, like educate them on how to use it. So I was the volunteer coordinator at our church for about 2 years for all of the volunteers, not just the children's ministry. And one of the things that I had to do was create training on how to use Planning Center because that's what we use to schedule and coordinate our volunteers. And so I had to create documents and videos to send out to our new volunteers who maybe had never used Planning Center before to teach them, right, and to educate them about it. And so I think that's a key part of it too, is that as we're communicating with volunteers, we can't just say, all right, now we're going to use Slack, right? We have to teach them how to use it and almost kind of train them to look for it, right? And to train them to go to Slack or to go to whatever communication tool we decide to use so that it becomes second nature, just like somebody who checks their email every day, or who checks certain social media apps every day, like something that becomes part of their routine, being active enough in it and being consistent with using that tool to communicate so that it trains them to go back to it for those communications.
Yeah. And some of it too is probably like holding people accountable because I think we all know, if we're honest, there's people that say, I prefer that, and then they still don't read it. Or
right.
You know what I mean? So how do you like make sure they're reading it? I even wonder too, I'm thinking about like if your email is your main thing, you could always text a link to that email or something like that. You know what I mean? So like if you're a text person, you're still reading an email, but you're getting it via text.
Right.
Or something like that would probably make sense. Well, speaking of tools and different things, like what are some of your favorite digital tools, apps that you like to use that would be helpful for leading volunteers?
Yeah. So I think Planning Center is probably my favorite. I don't get paid to endorse Planning Center, but if Planning Center wants to like slide into my DMs about that,
We'll
I
work on
love
that. Yeah,
to talk.
I'll be your
Um,
agent. We'll get
yeah,
something going.
I can be an affiliate or ambassador. Isn't that what it's called? Like a
Yeah, I
brand
don't know.
ambassador for
Yeah,
Planning Center. But that's definitely one of my top. I don't know how people schedule without Planning Center or something like it. I just really enjoy the way that it allows for seamless communication as well as scheduling and kind of keeping everything hyper organized. Google Suite is another digital tool that like people don't think of it as, it's not fancy, right? Like it's basically
yeah,
Microsoft Word and Excel online. But I think it can be really valuable for communicating with volunteers, having living documents, living spreadsheets. Like if you're not using Planning Center, then like using a Google Excel sheet to schedule volunteers, and then they can type in, when they're going to be out, or if they sign up that way. Like I think there's a lot of great tools there. Slack is one of my favorite communication tools as well. We've talked about that a little bit. Remind 101. So a lot of leaders will use this for communication with their families, but I love using it for my volunteers as well. So Remind, actually, I don't think they have the 101 on it anymore. I think it's just Remind now, but it's a texting app, for lack of a better word, that allows you to text large groups of people all at once, and you can schedule text ahead of time. So like you can
that's
group
great.
your volunteers based on the Sunday or the age group that they serve. You can schedule texts, you can sit down and schedule a whole month's worth of reminder text that's either like, hey, don't forget you're serving this Sunday, or even little bite-sized training elements. You can include links in the text. You can say, hey, watch this quick video about how to engage kids as soon as they walk in the door, or how to talk to youth about XYZ or whatever. So it's a great tool, I think, to communicate with volunteers that I love using. So
That's great. We use G Suite, Google Docs. Like that's where our curriculum is actually housed. It's like
yeah,
here's a link to a folder. That's been really. There was a time when like it was a little tough because if you didn't do the permissions right, people couldn't access it.
sure,
All those things.
sure.
I feel like they cleaned that up now. So that's been how we do it. And plus, if with certain accounts, there's unlimited storage on certain drives or whatever. So like we don't have to worry about running out of space, which has been helpful. I
Yeah.
know. I thought of this earlier and then forgot in the midst of our conversation. You talked about connecting with volunteers and using tools for that, whether it was a spreadsheet or whatever. We'll have to ask Kenny about this because after we're done, because there's an app he uses. He
Okay.
uses it to connect with other church leaders, but it's literally
Oh,
designed. It might be called Dex, like Rolodex, like
okay.
DEX. And anyway, it's designed like you put all your contacts in there that you want to like continue to connect with and stay updated with.
Yeah.
And I think you
Cool.
can tell like how often, and it'll kind of remind you. And somehow it connects to all of your like your email and some other things to know, or maybe even phone text messages. I don't know. Like it can pull in and tell you last communicated to Brittany 28 days ago or something
That's
like that.
cool. I'm writing that down because I want to
Yeah.
go look and see what that tool is
Yeah,
like.
it's a great idea, especially if like you're the kind of person that like you could use that kind of reminder to connect with
Yeah,
everybody, which that
sure.
would be me.
Me
Um,
too.
yeah, that would be a helpful tool. So that's great. Well, that's
Yeah.
a lot of good stuff. Well, there's a lot more obviously in the book. It is geared towards children's ministry, 7 different strategies. We're just talking about some of the volunteer ones here. Where can people get the book? And tell us a little bit about Deeper Kidman too.
Sure. So the book is available on Amazon, Time to Update by Brittany Nelson, or there's a link on Deeper Kidman as well, deeperkidman.com/time to update book that has more information. And then check out Deeper Kidman while you're there. So we're an online hub of digital resources made for children's ministry leaders by children's ministry leaders. I always tell people it's like the Teachers Pay Teachers or the Download Youth Ministry of the children's ministry world. So if you're in youth ministry world, you know DYM. So
Yeah.
Deeper Kidman is like the children's ministry version of DYM. So yeah, come check us out.
Yeah, that's great. And we are big fans at Ministry Boost of like not creating things from scratch. In fact, I think that is a lot of what
Absolutely.
we do is don't create things from scratch. And Deeper Kidman
Yep.
has all kinds of resources that way. Well, thanks for writing the book and for coming on Multiply Ministry to talk to us
Yeah,
about that and help us empower volunteers more with digital. Thanks, Brittany.
absolutely. Thanks, Nick.
All
What's
right.
up? That's
Well,
great.
hey, we got to get you to talk about that app. Because I talked about you have this. Is it called Dex, Rolodex,
It is
whatever?
called Dex.
Okay, tell people how it works. Because I think you could use
Yeah,
it for like in ministry. You could put all your
I
volunteers
think.
in there.
Yeah, I think you can. I was reading a book last year, or I was listening to a book, and it was talking about the power of just staying current and in front of people. And a lot of times in ministry, we forget. Like I think it's a really good reminder. Like just going through your list and texting your leaders. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about you today. how can I pray for you? Like how powerful that is. And sometimes we just need a reminder to be that intentional. So I found this software called Dex. It's maybe like $100 a year. What it does is it synchronizes with your contacts, with your LinkedIn. I mean, it's not intended for church uses. It's
Sure.
intended for like your
it's not
network.
with it's not sync with the planning center,
But,
you mean?
but what I did though was it uploaded probably about 1,000 contacts from me, and I categorized them by people I worked with in Texas, people I worked with in Arizona, ministry leaders that I've connected with at conferences, and I set up reminders. This contact I want to connect with once a month. This person every 6 months. But I think you could categorize it around your ministry, and you could set up reminders. So I get like almost every day I get a reminder of follow up with these 5 people. And the cool part about it is it does stay updated with LinkedIn, which is kind of funny. Anytime somebody changes their work with LinkedIn, I get a reminder, like I get a notification so I can connect with them. So it's I think it could be really helpful. You'd have to kind of make it work for your volunteers, but hey, sometimes we need tools to help us do what we need to do better.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, just like she talks about in the book, obviously the book is about leading digital in kids ministry, and so volunteers is just like a segment of it. But man, if you're not leveraging different digital tools, I need to, Kenny, you know this, but even, and some of the folks that are watching may have been part of this, but I was asking questions of leaders because I wanted to help build a volunteer app where you could almost like, and I didn't know Dex existed at the time, but it's like that similar idea of like, hey, I want to reach out to every volunteer within 30 days, and the app would tell you it's been 47 days since you've reached out to Kenny. You know, and you can keep track of how you reach out.
You know, I know this might be a little bit outdated, but you put together a resource maybe 5 or 6 years ago of all the tools, like the digital tools you use in your ministry. Now, some of them I think don't even exist anymore.
It is real outdated.
but there were some things in there that were helpful. And listen, Nick,
there's some we still use.
I've been around, and there's some churches, even though it might seem outdated, it would be cutting edge for where they're at. So maybe it's worth revising that document.
It is worth revising. That is actually in the plans for the end of this year to update that document. 30
That's
apps for leading family ministry. And if you got it right now, good luck to you, because there are some there that I wouldn't even use anymore. And I mentioned with Brittany that we use Google Drive for curriculum, which is true, but we actually use, this has probably opened up a whole other can of worms, but maybe we could do another quick call about this one time within our Ministry Boost Facebook group. But I use what you created, Kenny, where you basically use a WordPress website. Mm-hmm. And then you put the content on there, and all your volunteers go to that site. It's not like a public site. I mean, it is public, but we keep ours password protected because it's curriculum that can't be shared. And they just go click around, you know, and get what they need for that week. And whether you're a small group leader, large group leader.
The secret to that was I didn't want somebody to have to go to a site where they had to log in and remember their username and password to get the curriculum. And I didn't want to have to email people with all these attachments. And so how can I create a place where all curriculum content, including videos, if they want to watch it, can live on a site, and then I can just text them a URL every week. So I can send out a mass text to all of my volunteers, like, hey, here's this week, and people can bookmark it. So yeah, you're showing a picture of your churches. I stole this from a good friend of mine who was using it at her church and modified it, made it work for us. But look at that. It's so easy. Our volunteers, never an excuse for volunteers. Where do I get, you know, I don't print it anymore. I mean, I do print it for Sunday when people walk in. They've got a hard copy, but I never give it out in advance. It's always on the website. It's always 2 or 3 weeks at the minimum out. So that could be a good resource. If you want to know how to build something like this, we'd love to show you. We've built it out for a number of churches and such. Well, Nick, we went over time. So much good stuff. I'm actually amazed that there's as many people that are still hanging out, listening to us talk here. We need to shut this thing down. So
we got to wrap it. There's much better content at this point in the breakouts. You're going to go and check out the breakouts because you can check out that stuff there. Cool. Well, thanks for hanging out with us. All this content will be available from now through midnight tomorrow. And don't feel like you have to watch everything. But if you do want to, you know, engage with it more, like Kenny said, get the all access pass. We'll be emailing about that because you could easily miss some things. And I think one of the reasons you'll want the all access pass is because 6 months from now you might be like, hey, okay, now I'm ready to work on this. So let me go watch.
And we'll also break like these nearly 3 hour sessions, live sessions. We'll break them down by communicator, so that way you don't have to slog through hours worth of content to find what it was. So that'll be done early next week. So yeah,
Yep.
welcome to the family. We'd love to connect with you more if there's anything we can do for you. Thanks to all those who made this happen, and our sponsors, and our those that have come alongside us. So we love you guys, and however we can serve you guys, we're here for you.
See ya.